the idea that there's hateful speech, it's like, yeah, okay, that's self-evident, no problem. Well, let's regulate it. Okay, fair enough, because it's hateful, you know, maybe we would rather that there wasn't any of it. Okay, no problem. Who defines hate? Well, we'll worry about that later. It's like, no, you won't. That's actually the problem. Here's the answer to who defines hate. Those people that you would least want to have define it. That will be the inevitable consequence of the legislation, because sensible people won't have anything to do with that. Like, people who are power mad will gravitate to that domain to make an ethical case to exercise their controlling power over the language of other people. No, and I've had journalists say, well, what makes you think that your right to free speech trumps the right of someone to not be offended? And I think that's really the level of our political
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Well, we're going to start with a sort of follow-up on the conversation of free speech, the two-party illusion perspective, and the important dynamic of how it's being played right now, and show you, and really coming from an angle of the concept of anti-Semitism and how both sides are equally willing to censor you around, well, anything they use to justify the censorship of your speech for power and control, as some people used to say before they, whatever, whether it's Elon or anybody we would talk about. There's plenty of these examples like I just played from Peterson, where that's the logic applies, except that's just not what they're doing today. It's interesting, because there's now suddenly a reason they justify it, right? And this is the point I want to make today. Anti-Semitism being the point, with a new clip that Trump just reiterated for, I don't know what, the 19th, actually being accurate, like the 9th time, I believe, since in like months, he's come out and made a point about anti-Semitism, about how Israel should have influence over our speech, over our Congress. It's alarming stuff that his audience seems to ignore if they want to, but I think increasingly more and more people are becoming very uncomfortable about how obvious it is. So we're going to start with that point, because I do think it's very, very relevant. But today in general, it's more so going to be like, we're going to get into what's going on, the updates around Lebanon in particular, and Gaza as well, and some other important overview. The bulk of today, I think, is important. I actually decided to shift a little bit based off a clip that you probably have all seen today of Liam Cosgrove just calling it out in the State Department. And, you know, we've seen this a lot. We've seen Matt Lee, Saeed Erekat, Max himself at some point, which I think he probably got kicked out the last time. He was just holding his feet to the fire, wouldn't let him stop. And so I think that's probably why, I asked the same thing about Sam Husseini, which is the last one I was going to mention. Why they still allow him, because of how often he continues to push back. I think it's because people are paying attention, and they often don't really call on him. There's that famous quote where he says, "I'm just a potted plant," because they just never want to call on him. The point is, all of those people we've mentioned have been pushing back in the State Department, Matt Miller, the rest of them, how ridiculous it is. Just, as he calls it in this clip, BS, out in the open, which is what it is. You don't usually hear those kind of terms in the State Department briefings. And a reason I thought it was so powerful, not because he's saying what we've always been saying, but because he just had the courage to say it right there in front of everybody. I mean, obviously knowing it would be a clip, it's probably why he did it, and good on him, because it's now getting attention. And the way that Matt Miller responds, just righteous indignation. I wanted to use that point just to show you that it happened. It's more and more people are pushing back, but to make it kind of a refresher course of a lot of the things that the way he frames it, that we're all just fed up with this, right? And the point I'm getting from that is the thing that I'm always talking about, how the evidence is there. And I don't just mean like this one blog pointed out some document. I mean, as we've all seen, human rights groups almost entirely, the standing group, the leading groups in that field, almost in unison calling out what's happening. Basically every United Nations group, but they just go Hamas, and apparently people ignore that. But then country to country, the peoples of those countries, most governments, I mean, save for just a few voting no, almost every country in the world now has voted, will acknowledge this as a genocide and have calling for them to stop what they're doing. And yet they just keep doubling down. And individual cases like targeting doctors, targeting hospitals, lacking of evidence around their claims, or being proven to have lied about bombastic claims. And it just doesn't stop. Not only does it not stop, they just ignore that or push forward or keep pointing to it. So we all sense, I think that's why that clip is getting reach. What Liam is pointing out, we're done with your BS. We're done. We're just done accepting this at face value. Now, most people in that room, as you'll even hear in this clip, I'll make a point when we get there, I don't think care about that. I think they care about their status, their position, their access journalism, but good on those that are willing to challenge that, to make a point and to call out their lies. So I'm not going to, we'll go through a lot of it. You'll see Human Shield, and it's not going to be extensive in some of the past cases, mostly because we've talked about it a lot, but from point to point, showing you the, little one-stop shop of here, the provable evidence, whether it's scientific studies, whether it's Israeli media themselves with their own people and our government, army, and everybody calling it out, and they still deny it from point to point. I think it's an important show, more informative than some, well, it depends on what you find more informative, but this will be a very informative show. So I'd like to start with a couple of shout outs to some new work, or one new writer, as well as a new article that I think is really important. Actually, I take that back. I'll point Robert's article out after this first segment, because we're going to use his as kind of a segue into how shockingly dishonest the Israeli government is on its face, provably, using a story that Robert broke down excellently that's still being pointed to by the U.S. and Israeli governments, a fabricated lie about a woman that was kidnapped and sold from Hamas, or from ISIS to Hamas. And despite the ideological fundamental differences and the fact that they're actually enemies, we'll get into the actual reality of how this all went down and the lie that's being proven in real time that they lied and they just don't care, to segue in. Now, before we get to that, a great article called A Most Instrumental Myth. Now, this is written by Aaron Galvin, or Just a Thought on Twitter. And it's an important breakdown of one of the many different kind of logically inconsistent, or the constructs that are used to manipulate us. And this one is a basic one. Like we talk about the two-party illusion, the divide and conquer. This is about good and evil. And we've touched on this a lot over the years, but never said it exactly like this, which is the simple idea of the, Iran bad guy, as I would say, right? Russia bad guy. We're good guy, they're bad. This childish binary idea that people are inherently good or bad based on, I guess, the authority figure pointing to what they like you to think. And her point, as I've always said as well, that it's about choices in life. You don't get born good and bad. You're not born a Jewish person and therefore a bad person, or born a Christian and therefore a bad person. And there are people that feel this way, or a certain color. And hopefully it's becoming rapidly, shockingly clear that that's the people telling us about how we are supposed to be. The governments we're talking about, the U.S. and Israel, the Zionist organization, these are the people that are actively using on its face racist, I'm blanking on the other term, just racist ideology, explicitly telling you we are better than you, we are different than you, you are lesser than, and we know this is there. I'm not even just talking about Zionism, and we see this in the world. It's racism. But my point is, people in power are the ones pretending to be something different, while in fact driving you to feel, manipulating you through those channels, right? So in this case, our government is inherently good because they're powerful, right? Because they're the U.S. government, and the groups they point to are bad. Just broadly, Iran, bad. Despite the nuance to every conversation, and therefore, because we act within that paradigm, there's no conversation in which you can just go, oh, well, those actions are just what a country did. No, it's because Iran did it. They moved boats, therefore they're terrorist boats. Oh, I see. Right? Oh, no, that's just, you get my point. I can go off forever. It's right now going off the, terror tunnels and terror dungeons and terror. It's insulting. These are just locations that could be used for any number of things. That's how this works. Or in this context, she makes it a little bit more specific in the idea about who we are as individuals and how we view ourselves through this lens. And if you're a wealthy, well-to-do, with a great job and a lot of influence, well, it almost becomes accepted that you're a trusted good guy, right? Because you're an expert in your field. Well, what does that have to do with their internal intentions, with who they are as a person, with their lack of morals, if that's the case? Well, nothing. And that's the whole point. That's why you have a lot of sociopathic maniacs who are very influential, who are really bad people that get framed as the good person on both Fox and CNN, depending on what we're talking about. Really important. So take time to read this. I think it's a really great, one of these good points to start from if you're really kind of new to this stuff, to realize that if you're an honest person, it's easy to fall for this stuff because they play on our willingness to want to believe in the goodness of everybody. And I'm of the mind, as I've said many times, that I do believe that most people want good and are good because that's why they pretend to be good. They wouldn't be trying to convince you they're fighting for freedom while they're murdering children if they didn't think that you wanted good things in the world. So remember that. So hopefully we'll see more coming from her. It's a great article. Now, I wanted to start with one quick thing, just a passing point that I thought was crazy, that Josh reached out to me and is like, hey, check this out. I'll just read what he wrote. And this overlaps with the idea of something I recently said again on a recent interview. And that, I mean, anyone that knows this watches the show or followed my work or is even capable of reading peer-reviewed science or investigate the fact that weather modification is a shockingly real thing. It's very easy to prove, that's been around for a really long time. Now, there's obviously very big differences in the levels between like a cloud seeding conversation and then just, geoengineering and just actual weather modification, which, I mean, it's simple stuff if you really break a lot of the way these things work down. That was a weird way to say that, but Dane Wigington has done a lot of work on the different versions of this. And the point is, not to get into it all now, I don't even think this is one of these topics that's like pretending geoengineering is fake. It's like, how can you even pretend that? I mean, at best, you would be saying that everything they're doing and their programs are all made up to convince us of that. I could go along with that. I could understand how that logic, that would make sense. I don't disagree. But in this case, they're just going fake. And there are people that are still saying that about geoengineering while they're literally conducting programs to dim the sun. It's just because people get so trapped in their mindset. And that's what social engineering looks like, almost to a cultish level. That's what we're seeing right now in the paradigm. So back to this point about weather engineering or weather manipulation, weather, modification, these are real things that have been studied, that have been worked on. Now, just because they've been studied or there are patents, for example, does not therefore mean they're real or in action. But all that's to say that I've many years, people, myself and others, have proven that this is something that is happening. Now, the question then is that what we're seeing today? And I think that's a hard line because I don't think that's been proven in most cases. This comes up in, but nonetheless, I'm like, you don't even have to convince me. I'm going to push back on whether we can prove that it happened, but not whether we're debating that it can happen. That's an important distinction. So he brings up a patent that I just thought was really interesting. Now, even that whole conversation aside, this patent should be interesting to you anyway. I find this stuff interesting and terrifying at the same time. And he said, a patent I found, of course, with Bill Gates listed as the inventor, titled Water Alteration Structure Applications and Methods. And it says outlines technology focused on altering environmental conditions, particularly particularly the temperature and composition of surface water and subsurface water in oceans. Now, right there, obviously, you can see how that could be used if you actually have done your due diligence and understand one of the many ways that weather modification is possible that could tie in together. But it gets more interesting. But even that in itself, I just find that these people are just the way that there's so much of this behind the scenes of manipulation that we don't know is active, and I'm not talking about patents, it's just like real time stuff it worries me how many people are still blinding themselves to what these people are capable of. And I'm not many different groups I would frame as these people in different conversations, whether it's government or big pharma, or I just think we need to acknowledge that they are without question willing to test on us, willing to sacrifice us. And I'm just talking about for whether it's for money, for influence, for control, for covering up something. I mean, 100%. This is not a movie kind of conversation. This is real stuff. And we've seen this throughout history. So I'm just, as a kind of a side point, let's just acknowledge that we live in this kind of world and fight to make it more accountable for that reason. But then he shows a couple of the patent images, and I've got the patent right here that you guys can check out for yourself. And he also points out, look at the area that they're using to make this point. It's interesting. And in the patent, it says a method to generally describe which includes environmental alteration. It says that right there, environmental alteration. Further, the method includes generation movement of the water adjacent the surface of the water in response to placing. He goes on to say, theoretically, the technology described in the patent could be used to strengthen storms. Now, he's clear about this, and he responds down below as well, that it's actually being framed as diminishing storms. But anyone that would say, that doesn't say, it says diminish, and he's not claiming it says the opposite, but you realize that's how, like, for instance, the insect allies conversation. Do you remember that? Where, like, I probably just pull that up real quickly, where they came up and said, we're going to use, I can't type. There it is. We're going to use insects genetically modified to protect crops. Okay. Didn't work though, because basically scientists everywhere in the world were like, no, signed documents and said, nope, that's pretty much a biological weapon. You could just use it the other way. And they quietly went away with it, except it didn't go away. It just turned into GMO mosquitoes, and it's very real. And I've played that clip many times about the self-spreading vaccine where they reference the same dynamic in this field. This is what it is. This is the same thing. It didn't go away. They just pretended to stop it and called it something else. Like common real core or main core and total information awareness and men Palantir, right? Or today, no, we don't like CBDs, but we'll give you, or CBDCs, we'll give you a privatized version. That's always how this goes. Just remember that. This is the point, is they pretend to stop things only to get you to think it stopped, and then the partisanship covers it all up, and all of a sudden it happens in 37 different ways. But to this, when they're talking about using this to diminish it, it could just as easily be used in the other way. So just make sure you understand how obvious that is, and that's usually how these are framed. But then he says the core principle behind this patent could be, used either way. The ability to manipulate water temperatures and compositions could, in theory, be used to increase the energy available to storms. I agree with that. Storms like hurricanes. Well, you know what? Just for interest of time, since I have a lot to get to today, read it for yourself. I think the point is clear. It's just yet another patent, of course, with Bill Gates' name on it, that happens to be related to this exact conversation. I find that interesting. Nowhere is that, am I saying that proves connection or anything like that? Just interesting data points, but these are the kind of things that would be disregarded by the kind of people that wouldn't want to think about the reality of how these could be used. I'll include that for you to look at. Now, the other first kind of starting point really is around the two-party illusion and the anti-Semitism in particular with the next part of the segment, but just about free speech and about how you are being, in my opinion, being played. Now, first, I just want to start with this really interesting tweet from Elon that's talking about this weird thing that I've looked into recently called Polymarket, which is so it's essentially buying votes, but not real votes for the election, but like a sort of like you can bet, and you vote and you pay for that vote, and then the money you paid gets tallied, and you can see here that whoever gets the more money, or rather just the more votes, they theoretically win on this market, and you can win money based on this, and it's betting essentially. And I'm like, this is really strange. I mean, obviously people bet on everything. I mean, if you don't know that, if you look up like Vegas, you could find a bet on damn near anything. And that's what's pretty alarming for me, is the way that our government and people that are influential, they bet on human markets and environmental markets. And that's where, Whitney's talked about this. Courtney's talked about the natural asset companies. Like, that's what's starting to happen. It's a weirdly eerie thing where this is happening at the same time. Now, it could be nothing, but I just personally find it interesting that this is happening. And what the connection is. Why do they point at this? I mean, I get the sense that you're saying, well, they're voting, right? So that you could just look, it's like a poll essentially, and they're even paying for it. So I would even argue, I get it. That makes it seem like it's more valid, like they're willing to pay for it. But I just don't know how, I've looked in a little bit. I don't know if you're able to pay for more votes. Can you buy more than one? The whole thing seems very strange to me. I get the sense that it's just about the idea of kind of a segue into a new type of thing. Just my personal gut feeling on it. The idea of the monetization or tokenization of all of this to make it more about a gambling idea. It's very strange. Or it's just a poll. But people are pointing at it like he is, saying victories. Oh, this says Kamala's collapsing before our eyes. Now, just to be clear, this has literally nothing to do with the actual election. And even if you think that, my opinion is that nothing does, because it doesn't exist and your votes don't count. And they've stolen that from you. If you don't know what I mean by that, check out my other shows. I'm not going to break off on that today. But I find it interesting. And he says, victory is not enough. It must be absolutely decisive victory. Now, what's weird is that this did just shockingly break off all of a sudden over the last, just on October 7th. It seems pretty weird to me. You guys can decide what you want. Now, to start though, before we get into another one, I found this clip now I do believe this guy is a pretty partisan guy. That shouldn't change the data, but as always, just consider that. But going through, we'll come back to the voting part and we'll come back to the free speech part. But just quick sidestep on this, because it does relate. I find this very interesting. So this guy just says, total BS from the sellout Elon Musk. Oh, you know what? I just realized that I didn't grab this. So this clip is essentially him pointing out what many of us have, and we're going to get into a little bit as well, kind of like the larger conversation of Israel, that Donald Trump has called him a fraud and a fakester and a sellout. And Elon has said very terrible things about Trump. And then, Vance said Trump is a terrible person. And RFK said Trump doesn't make it. Like, every one of them have very clear examples very recently of calling each other like the worst person and untrustworthy and a fraud. And now they're all together. So, of course, you could say, well, they were lying or they did it for politics or they changed their mind. But I do find it impossible to pretend like it all, like, how do you pretend like it all makes sense? There either should show you that they all lie about everything, and that's what I kind of think is the reality. They're all just politicians or grifters in their own way. Now they're just finding a way to benefit themselves, or they think they can make more change that way. Or they were telling you the truth, and now they're shoved together for some reason that's not of their own making. I mean, I don't know how we overlook a lot of this stuff. So going to the same point, watch this little quick clip, and we'll come back, get back into it.
Shit creepy as hell. Like how
Oh, and that was the other thing too. Just so it's clear, this is a real picture of him while he's shaking Donald Trump's hand. I mean, I looked just to make sure that wasn't, some weird image where he's like jumping, doing something, and it's not. He's shaking Donald Trump's hand when he's doing this. I also kind of find that pretty weird. And I would say it was weird about a Democrat too, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's weird. What's with the face he's making? I don't know. Because my impression, like I said in the last show, with the hat, with everything, with the new icon on his, I think he's making fun of you guys. I think he's genuinely making fun that you guys think this stuff makes sense or is real. I think, frankly, all of them do. I think all of the people in these power positions look at you like you're mindless lemmings because you're bowing at the altar of partisanship, but that's my opinion. But look at what he does and ask yourself whether you think it seems genuine to you on an objective perspective or that he's playing a role. I'm sure it's hard for people in it to see that, but I think it's quite clear.
Ain't this shit creepy as hell? Like, how unsettling is this? This is Elon Musk at Trump's rally. What's crazy about this is that in 2022, Elon Musk tweeted, "For Twitter to deserve public trust, it must be politically neutral," which effectively means upsetting the far right and the far left equally.
Now, don't you find that interesting? I mean, that's not what's happening, right? Politically neutral. Now, of course, the game that we played, as always, is, well, he's an individual citizen, right? The same thing that the people in left or right would call out the people in politics they don't like. But the point is that he's talking about politically neutral. Well, he is Twitter. Let's not pretend that's not the case. He is a driving force with shockingly more views than anything, even ×2 behind him, driving what gets talked about, driving what the mob around him ultimately does. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. That's free speech. But of course, the overlap with politics and whether he's in a government position, whether even advisor or not, that does change what he does, even though I guarantee it won't, legally speaking. But my point is that politically neutral is not at all what he's going on to say, what he's doing now. And it's not equally outraging either side. It's really not. Let's be honest about that. And that's not how it should be played. I'm of the mind that there's a truth. And that often outrages one element in a dynamic. It's not that we play it balanced. That's the corporate media, right? One story over here, one story over there. That's false. That's fake information. That's an illusion. There's no balance when it comes to the truth. There's just the truth. But politically neutral is not what this is.
But literally 3 days ago, he tweeted, "Trump-Vance must win. I can't handle 4 years of seeing and hearing Kamala walls. That would be cruel and unusual punishment." My question is, what changed? What made Elon Musk bow down and kiss the ring? Because
That's a good question, though. Aside from the political partisan, myopic view of what's going on in this country, from a broad perspective, look at how many people have on a dime. Trump in many ways, Elon, RFK Jr. I mean, I know there are more. I was thinking about it earlier, but there's a lot of people that have just kind of turned all of a sudden and are now, Jordan Peterson, like where they just all of a sudden take this hard turn not in every possible way, but in obvious ways, and people just go, "Oh, well, they're just compromising for politics." Well, maybe, but I frankly also find that disgusting. You don't compromise your principles for some desired outcome that never comes around, and they think they know that, but I think it's obvious there's something else going on.
Order receipts, and I remember when Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, when Elon Musk came to the White House asking me for help on all of his many subsidized projects, whether it's electric cars that don't drive long enough, driverless cars that crash, or rocket ships to nowhere, without which subsidies he'd be worthless, and telling me how he was a big Trump fan and Republican, I could have said, "Drop to your knees and beg," and he would have done it. Or what about the time that Donald Trump called Elon Musk a bullshit artist in his rally?
I mean, how do you pretend like you can say something like that and then just change your opinion? That he would beg, that he was a fraud, and now you just, "Oh wait, I'm wrong. I talked to him on the phone and now I disagree." I guess. That's pretty weird.
Elon, he said the other day, I've never voted for a Republican. I said, I didn't know that. He told me he voted for me. So he's another bullshit artist, but
I think the most unsettling thing about this is not even how he looks. It's the fact that this is the man who owns Twitter, a mass communication platform where he manipulates and controls the algorithm. How are we supposed to expect that that algorithm is not going to be manipulated for the interference of this election? I guess it's true what they say. When Donald Trump says jump, Elon Musk says how high.
Got it. No TikTok thing at the end. Yeah, and I mean, that whole thing seemed odd, right? I mean, I know people love to frame all of us at one point or another based on what's going on as left or right. But my point is I criticize all of them. I really do. Yes, I'm clearly at this moment concerned more about what's going on here. But if you look at our entire track record, that's the case. My point is if this thing happened with Kamala and Biden, I would find it equally unsettling. What it did, the way it went down, the way he was acting, the way he responded. I said it on the show. It felt weird. It felt like, I don't know, like he was playing a role, like pretending. It felt strange. Now, that's my personal opinion. I could be completely off. Also, the electric car thing I find strange, as Elon has like double down more than once right up to this day about how that's the future. And Vance and everybody else seems to be saying something, it doesn't mean they can't just be, we disagree and that's okay. I would actually appreciate that, but I don't think that's what's happening. Based on, Whitney put out a great kind of article / post on Twitter about this today. And the point being about how they're using these people, in her opinion, RFK, it's like an illusion where he's going around as if what he's saying is Trump's policy, even though there's never been a public statement about that shift, and Trump has never apologized for the policies that RFK promised he would have to say before he joined his cabinet. The assumption is that happened. I agree with her. I don't think it did. And what they keep saying publicly shows you that's not the case. His policies, everything. I mean, with the GMO vaccines or GMO foods, all these things that are primary to RFK voters. I mean, Trump's already shown himself to be loosening restrictions for these businesses. Now, I hope he changes. I hope he does influence them. I would love to believe that that's what's happening, as always. Sadly, I don't think that's the case. I hope I'm wrong. Now, so he shows you this, and I think that's important to recognize the contradiction within it. So back to the voting point, the weird poly market thing, which I'll include some, here he says, Fisher King says, you can vote for a living, breathing human being, Trump. The way they frame these things is just cartoonish. Who will try to exercise the power of the presidency on behalf of Americans? Oh, do we know that now? It's actually really embarrassing, childish, naive that people put this forward like what he thinks and feels. As I think I just learned this from was it Dissenters News? Sam Husseini calls it political mind. Oh, now I forget. It's like political mind reading or something like that. The point being simple is that you're just projecting based on what you want. Like, the U.S. is doing this to achieve this, and Iran's doing this. Like they frame it as, if you're on the side you want to project positive things, then you frame it as if the intentions are trying to free whatever. On the other side, it is you will trying to, what you get the point. I can't think of the way to say it. If it's the guy, your adversary, you end up claiming you fill in the blank about their intentions with the negative thing. But they don't know what either of them want. You don't know what they want and feel and think. I say this all the time. I mean, we all can talk about that. I make points like this, but I make it clear that's my opinion about what I think they're saying. So when they say, who will try to do this? We should laugh at that. It's deserving of ridicule because you're claiming what Trump thinks and feels. That's pretty embarrassing. And it says, or you could vote for what we have now, which I guess would be the Biden administration with a VP, right? But they love to make it out to be everything Kamala, which I could even get on board with, seeing as how Biden clearly is not all there. But I think we all really know about the position of the vice president, except now it's easier to make it seem like everything is Kamala because that works for what they want. I think that we know that's the case. But he says a meaningless figurehead operating on behalf of invisible people lining their pockets. Really? So hypothetically, like a technocrat, Peter Thiel, Vance, influence. I mean, you get the point, guys. It's the same thing everywhere. We're talking about that. That's our government. Or AIPAC in Israel funding. We're talking about invisible people lining their pockets. Well, in some cases, not invisible, but you can see the people lining Biden and Kamala's pockets. In some cases, you can't. It's the same damn thing. They just are okay with the ones that they can see on Trump's side. It's just simply hypocrisy. And he says, exactly, vote against the machine. And like I said last time, guy, you are the machine, which all these people gave me hard times for saying the word guy, which I don't understand. He is the machine. He is exactly a part of the machine. He is literally building the machine. He is being paid by the machine, and he is literally the machine. And I mean that in the sense of what we're calling the machine. You are part of it. You're a functioning part of the oligarchy. You are a military contractor. You are a billionaire. In fact, I think isn't he the richest person in the world at this point? Close to anyway. How in the world is this an outsider? Oh, but he's sacrificing everything to fight for you. Is he? Well, no, he's not sacrificing. They love to give you the theater, but it's only growing. His partnership with GARM didn't go away. His acquiescing to government censorship is still happening according to his own lawsuit. He is the machine. And he's still censoring, which is the point we're getting into next. Right now, they're censoring, and you damn well know it. Censoring because they're partnered with the ADL. They're telling you can't say certain things about Israel. They're actively beginning to drive forward the idea that anti-Semitism is on. We're going to get to it. Donald Trump publicly saying we're going to remove the Jew haters from this country. Now, look, even if you think he genuinely means people that actually hate Jews for no other reason that they're a disgusting person, that is their constitutional right. This idea that we pretend, one, that you're not allowed to do that because of some legislation that's repugnant to the Constitution, which, by the way, I would agree, they're disgusting people. But secondarily, you're going to remove them from the country based on something they think and feel? I mean, how do we even pretend like this logically makes sense? Thirdly, you know what they're going to say. He's just saying it to get elected. Oh, it's fun how we love to put that out there when it works for you. He's just doing that to get their vote. Well, how do you know? I don't know. I could agree that he could be saying that to benefit himself and won't do it. But I could also agree that his track record shows that he has done it and will continue to. So it kills me. Vote against the machine while he is building it for you. Now, again, I'll include these for you, this polymarket thing, which I find really strange. It seems to be largely focused around the election, at least the top things right now, which I guess just exploded this time. Like it's gone crazy. But it really basically is just like a political casino. Here it says, polymarket is the world's largest prediction market. It gives you the opportunity to profit from your beliefs by betting on the outcome of future events. Now, this feels eerily like what the oligarchy, the elitists, are doing with your life. They are, by the way. Whether we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals or ESG, that's what we're talking about. And really, it's abstract in the sense where if they bent as they would view it, are adherent to what they're claiming is good, even though they've got passes for oil and nuclear weapons, because, freedom, it's all stupid. The point is that if they're adherent to these things, they get benefits, essentially, from this whole dynamic. And so in a way, it's a sling, but at the end of the day, it's also very specific. We've gone over this on the show. It goes into specific actions within communities, lives. I mean, everything's being monetized and tokenized. This, to me, just seems like they want to get you in on it to make you feel like this makes sense. This feels weird. Maybe you have a right to do it. Go ahead, bet on whatever you want. But I think this is more about social engineering, quite frankly. This says, Polymarket. I'll have to subscribe. Polymarket discusses fresh funding amid election betting craze. Let's see. I knew it. I wasn't going to get into this too deep. I just want to include this for you guys to read. Curious who the funding is, though. I'll come back to it. Now, this is interesting around the voting aspect. And again, all of this does kind of surround around the part about free speech. My point is to show you that they're all driving you to invest in this election when all of them are giving you the same outcome. Now, he says, for every person, this is different, by the way. This is not the same thing. Jack Posobiec says, Elon's PAC. So, by the way, let's not forget, PACs and super PACs in and of themselves are what a lot of people see as the problem. Ways for them just to pretend like this is just bribery and money influencing our political outcomes. Where do you think a lot of that comes from? Well, you already know. Israel is a major player in the way that the funds circulate during an election, if not the largest player. But he says his PAC is literally offering to pay you $47 for every registered voter you refer in a swing state that signs this petition. Now realize their big point is that, well, the Democrats are buying votes via illegal immigration to eliminate swing states. He said this 47 times I've seen. I should just 47 jump to my head because he says that a lot. I've seen him say this a lot. So isn't this buying votes? Well, literally, quite literally it is. But arguably you could say, well, okay, he didn't say what kind of voter. But are we going to pretend that your Republicans doing this are going to go find Democrats? Well, no. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. We all know that they're going to be Republicans bringing in Republican voters. Why? I mean, that's the whole point of what this is. So, of course, we could still stand back in objectivity and say, well, you know, maybe generally, who knows? But we all know, even if he doesn't mean that, people that are doing this are not going to want to bring in, because the whole point is for a swing state. So they want Republicans. So this is Elon Musk's PAC buying people to bring in voters. So it's like half a step removed from straight up buying votes. I find that wild. But to be clear, it's happening everywhere. It's not unique to Elon or Republicans. But I think it's hilarious because he says, for every person you refer in a swing state specifically, you get $47, easy money. Well, I said, well, didn't you just get done telling us the left was buying votes? You're all ridiculous. I mean, think about how dumb it is to go on this huge tirade. And what even more funny is that you're claiming, which I disagree only with the premise that we know for sure that any immigrant from anywhere in the world, from any standing, will just vote Democrat. You could prove that's not true. In fact, I think that's changed even if it was ever true, it's changed a lot over the years. Because again, it's always how this works. Last election, they couldn't stop telling us how the black community was voting for Trump and that the immigrants were more so for Trump. But now, because it works from the other way, well, they give you the other narrative. But I honestly don't know. I don't think anybody truly knows, because each person out there has their own perspective. But they want you to think they're doing this because they vote for Democrats. So at best, you could say that they're spending money on immigration in hopes that they vote for them. Wouldn't you argue that this is explicitly voting, paying for votes, whereas that's more abstract? Again, my point is they are all doing it in all different ways that we don't even talk about, or cheating and lying, just like every single election. To me, this is just comically stupid that you're doing. And as always, if you get pushed hard enough, they're going to go, well, they did it first. Aha. So you're the same thing. More true than you think out there if you're only first seeing the show, but it's like anything else. They use cluster bombs, so we're going to use them. It's their fault. No, you're a terrorist too then. You're just as bad as they are, no matter what your justification. So I just think this is pretty sad. But hopefully, because we're talking about it, more and more people, or anybody else out there looking, it's starting to wake you up to the illusion of all of it. Now, on the point of censorship, because that's one of the points I really wanted to reiterate, because we know we just made a long point about it last show. But I want to make this point explicitly again in the beginning-ish of the show, because I think it's important that people see this, if they haven't. And the deceptive way they're trying to frame, one, really based off what Hillary Clinton just said, which, again, she's like the worst person on the planet, but it's important to understand what was said and what the thought was, and then to show you what's literally happening on Twitter and what Yaccarino and Elon both agreed to. Moderation. Now, of course, the idea is that, well, they want different moderation. Well, you don't know that for sure. I would agree. They probably have different perspectives, but now we're getting into the realm of assumption, which is always what guides these partisan points. But it says the left controls almost all legacy media, which again is a lazy point. The left is just like the right are very multifaceted things, even within their own group. And so what are we saying? Does the DNC control every social media platform? I don't agree with that. It's very lazy. I think it's the government. I don't think there's a left-right idea. I think it's all about your government trying to manipulate you. But let's just say you do believe that they're left and right fighting for control, which I think you can prove is shockingly false. But ultimately, you can see a lot of other middle aspects of it. You could also prove that people behind Twitter right now, and even Elon himself as a Democrat, or Yaccarino from the World Economic Forum, or did he own it? All these different people behind it, and yet we still pretend just because they say certain things. It just seems kind of a lazy argument, right? Either way, let's just say for sake of conversation that the left controls all legacy media and social media platforms, which is the point he's making, which I very clearly would see. We all can see a slant. He says, except this one, which, if we're coming to the point of actual censorship, which is what this is ultimately about, or freedom of speech, there is no difference. I mean, right now, quite frankly, I've seen things going on around other platforms that are usually more in the censorship field, even like YouTube, for example. There are things I've seen censored on Twitter that aren't censored on YouTube, and vice versa. But I think it's interesting to see that when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to this concept of hate speech, which is what they're pointing at when they say anti-Semitism, that they're on the same level. And he says, we strive to be a level playing field for all views. Does anybody believe that? Even the people out there who want to pretend this is the case, you know damn well that you're happy to see them censor criticism of Israel, which they're doing right now. Every day, I'll show you more today, I think. We just went over the one about the guy talking about Russian discussions. It was Mark Leslovoda pointed that out. Well, they censored him. And he spoke up about it. No one cares. Or even, I'll show you next about the January 6th people that have never been brought back, or plenty of COVID doctors and scientists that are still censored. Now, that they haven't brought them back is a bit different than continuing to, but they are doing that too. And we've proven this. Peter Sweden simply says, the left is mad, outraged that Elon's supporting Trump. Maybe on their personal petty levels that don't know what's really going on. But my point, it's all part of the game. I think this is just more aspects of your government playing the shadows in the cave in front of you to convince you that you're fighting for us one side versus the other. They've been doing it for our entire existence. This is what they are completely silent about George Soros buying 200 radio stations and Google supporting the Democrats. I mean, so to me, what's funny about that is, you know how many parallels you could make of Republicans doing similar things, of Republicans or Republican platforms, Rumble and support. I mean, it's all because those are outrageous to them, whereas the other ones they see as a good thing. It's all personal perspective, and it's hypocrisy at the end of the day. Oh yeah, this is just, interesting point, by the way. We talked about this morning a bit on AM Wake Up. Now, I don't agree that everybody pointing things out that are going on in North Carolina, for example, are misinformation hurting the flow of aid. I quite frankly think the obvious part of it is that our government is dragging its feet or straight up allowing people to be hurt for lack of liability or their own financial interest, all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom. I believe that. And I think it's provable every time. That does not mean that I think everything being said about this is true. And what Steve said on the show today is that there's somebody somebody close to him has a friend that lives in Chimney Rock and is openly saying that these Republican, and I believe that guy is even a Republican. He's saying that these Republican broadcasters are flagrantly lying. And by the way, I agree, just like in every other time we've talked about. It's not unique to left or right. It's just different topics. Like we've seen during COVID, the left was lying through their teeth about everything. The point here is that they're making stories drive this in. Well, that ultimately stops the awareness of what is going on, whether even that is weather modification or something else. And it's stopping accountability for what we can prove. Like every other one of these, like East Palestine or Lahaina, it becomes bombastic and it goes to the stuff where we can't prove, and we focus there and we get lost in that deliberately, I would argue, and nothing ever changes. So I want us to think about that. So this guy's simply saying, why is MAGA interfering with and crippling FEMA efforts? I don't agree with the broad stroke. I don't. But I do think it's important to recognize that even though those posts about how misinformation is hindering something, we all reflexively push back on that today because they are always using that claim to suppress what we're saying. But realize that they're even in the past around conversations where they are doing that, I can still show you that people step on top of true things and lead you into the ground. There's a government agenda for that. So don't forget that. Now he says, Dear Elon, I hereby request the reinstatement of over 150,000 Twitter accounts that were permanently suspended on January 8th, 2021. Many of these accounts were targeted for removal by the old Twitter and were also great resources for news and theories on your platform. By reinstating them, you will show your commitment to the level playing field. Yeah. Do you think it's going to happen? Well, it should, right? I mean, but at the end of the day, I think what we know if we're paying attention today is that they are still censoring. So why in the world would we pretend like this would give you any indication that they're going to do anything different? So right now, without question, an objective person can see that they're still censoring, which is not even that's happening. Without question. We keep showing you counts that are taken down. They've even backed things up, even right in the beginning, whether it was Fuentes or anybody else or Diddy, or who was it? That's interesting. Who was it Diddy in the beginning? I don't want to jump into it now. But the point is, they've censored. They just have a justification for it, which people who don't want to see as a problem will ignore and pretend like it makes sense. But right now, they are censoring. They are censoring, and they're working with the ADL. That's publicly stated by Yacarino, and they're working with all sorts of groups. They were partnered with GARM, like we said. It's very clear to see that they're acting in line with what the government's doing, and they proudly stated, freedom of speech, but not reach, awful but lawful. Right? That they will take things down if they decide that. And on top of that they will allow moderation to decide and ultimately just strict funds if they don't think that it is something they agree with. I'll play it for you again. That's directly from her mouth. Okay. So the clip we'll play for you again from Clinton, which is equally concerning, is simply saying that we will lose total control if we don't moderate content. That was her point. Okay, so if you're more concerned about, well, the point is if they're moderating right now and are censoring, how is that any different? And on top of that, if you're going to pretend she meant we lose control that we currently have, it's the dishonest way that everyone on the Republican side of this is framing it, doesn't that then mean that she currently has control of Twitter? Yeah, see, logic plays a factor here, doesn't it? If we're going to lose total control, that implies they have total control, which they don't, because you're claiming he runs Twitter. That's not total then. Her point was, as always, trying to find the nuance in all of this, but stop defending somebody. Well, she's saying we'll lose control. It'll go crazy. You know she wants to censor. You know she doesn't care about your rights. But our point is, neither does the other side. And all they're trying to do is point at this to make you outraged. The left is going to destroy free speech. They want to change the Constitution. Again, showing you that you don't understand the Constitution. And you're doing the same thing. As Trump tells you, as we'll get into next, that we're going to stop people that are screaming about Israel. How do you think that's going to happen? We got to stop allowing these influencers to lie to people. So this person says, again, actually, this is really interesting. This New York Post, which I've identified personally since at least in the conversation of what overlaps with Israel and just right now, even stuff like this, one of the most dishonest platforms right now in the kind of mainstream sphere, in my opinion. Crazy. And I'll make an example of it right here. She says, I do not want to vote for Trump, but stuff like this gives me no choice. Guys, so that's blackpilled for you right there. You're blackpilled. You are giving up. If you're going, I don't want to, but I guess what? I have no choice. Well, there is what they pretend we're doing. No, we're giving you plenty of other choices and other paths and you just don't like where it goes. That is giving up. And of course, Keeley points out again that here's Trump doing the same thing. We have to censor the internet and work with Bill Gates because ISIS is what he was arguing a couple years ago. Yep. But so here's my point. First of all, here's the New York Post. As a supposed journalistic platform, deliberately misquoting her. We lose control. Well, that's not what she said. She said we lose total control. And they even say it right down here, right underneath it. We lose total control. Well, you know why I think that's relevant? And maybe I'm overthinking it, because the point I'm making. They know that if we say we lose control, that implies that they have control and that they're fighting to maintain it. And Elon's trying to help you do that. Well, if you listen to it with the inflection on the word and you remove that word, well, suddenly it has different context. That's not journalism, guys. That is straight up propaganda. And again, Hillary Clinton is equally as concerning. They're all doing the same thing. So this is one of the clips we're talking about. And I'll play it for you really quickly. Here is Michael Schellenberger just gushing over the idea that only Clinton and nowhere else, except for the fact that a child could see that that's incorrect. Maybe reflect on who has journalistic integrity or wherewithal in the context of partisan lenses when we talk about stuff like this.
We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because.
If you want my comments on Section 230, go to the other show from day before yesterday. I don't want to get into it again today, but there's important points to make around that.
They were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
Okay. So obviously moderate is the solution she provides. And the way we lose total control, right? Okay. So right there, let's even do it like this. You could look at it three ways. And this is just being honest about what's being stated. You could look at it as she's saying we used to have total control. And this would even lean into Elon's point. And then Twitter got taken from us, and now we lose total control. That would make sense. Or you could argue that it means we just lose total control, like as if we just lose it, it goes crazy. We everything goes out of control. But the way that they're trying to frame it as if they currently have it, and if we let this go, we then lose control, is just dishonest. But that's how the partisanship works. It's just like what Israel's doing. Whatever works that day, we'll change it tomorrow. Because most people who go along with these things don't really care about the truth. Now, the important part here is about censorship. Whether, even just taking it as what they pretend it is. They are all, that aside, they're all calling for censorship. She wants to censor you. She wants to control what you can say for their benefit. Okay? So that's not debatable. So what's important to recognize, and again, here was Carrie, same thing. That, and they all mention Twitter, which I don't think is by accident. When again, they all know that they're currently censoring, right? And it's incredible that the theater that's being put forward. This should terrify all who love their freedom. It's the way it's being framed. I just, I can't take these people seriously anymore. But he says, it says Bill Gates 2 weeks ago, John Kerry last week, Hillary Clinton today, all demanding government censorship of X. Well, really what they're demanding is censorship. And they highlight Twitter, right? But the point is, if you're not going to argue or highlight that Twitter is currently doing this, currently moderating content, currently censoring people based on a number of discussion points, then you're just either blind or dishonest. This is hard to see this as a coincidence. They appear to be laying the groundwork for totalitarianism, or you're just taking the bait as they lay it out for you and you step right into it and act like this is the only one that's going to save us while ignoring the facts in front of you. Our democratic republic is in danger. At least he doesn't say democracy, but to pretend like we even remotely live in a republic or a democracy is childishly naive or dishonest. And again, we've had studies that came out from Princeton that say without question, it's an oligarchy and has been for a long time in this country. But yet people like this, they throw these words out because they're working for, I don't know the intention, but I feel like this whole conversation is about trying to convince you of their viewpoint, right? So again, I don't know whether he believes it or not is the point, but I think it's obvious where this is driving you. So either he is deceiving you or he isn't aware that this is not a republic. I find that very important to highlight. Now here is Yaccarino. Now, this is Yaccarino versus Yaccarino. So it's what you said at the beginning, and it's what you said recently in a conversation. But what we're showing you is that they have agreed to moderate content. And now when they talk about GARM, even though they partnered with GARM, and she knows that, so they all are lying to you, that they pretend it's them trying to do what they are already doing. A select group deciding who gets finances. Well, that's what you do, and you make that point. So it's like 3 layers of BS.
I was shocked by the evidence uncovered by the House Judiciary Committee that a group of companies organized a systematic illegal boycott against X.
More of an open feedback loop for the advertising experts in this room to help develop Twitter into a place where they will be excited about investing more money, product development, ad safety, content moderation. That's what the influence is.
That puts your global town square, the one place that you can express yourself freely and openly.
We have built content moderation tools that have never existed before at this company.
Okay, so how is that different than Clinton? Right? I mean, so if you don't know what Clinton's proposing, she just says moderation. So you could pretend that you know hers is different. But it's not really about being different, you see, because that just makes you a hypocrite. It's about moderating your speech. It's about censoring what you can say. And if your only issue is on Twitter, well, they're doing the same thing. I don't understand the difference other than looking through a partisan lens. And anybody honest with themselves would agree with that. This is very clearly the same thing. And as we see them doing this for Israel, the left wants the same thing. We need to recognize that this is a larger manipulation.
If you are going to post something that is lawful, but it's awful, you get labeled.
At long-term risk.
Or censored, okay, because that is happening. There's no disputing that.
People are hurt when the marketplace of ideas is constricted.
And we've introduced a new policy called freedom of speech, not reach.
No small group of people should be able to monopolize what gets monetized.
But more importantly, if you're going to post something that is lawful, but it's awful, you get labeled, you get de-amplified, which means it cannot be shared. Mm-hmm. And it is certainly demonetized.
So that's the same thing as what you just said. A select group of people deciding who gets monetized. Well, that's what you just did. Talk about hypocrisy. It's pretty infuriating. So before we go into the anti-Semitism part of it, I just think it's important that we have the courage to point this out, especially if you are a conservative out there and you see people that you look up to screaming falsehoods. Have the courage to point it out. Except I think you somewhere in your mind know that they'll probably just block you because, well, hopefully that opens a journey for you on recognizing what we're really dealing with. But it's important to see that the consistency of censorship is obviously there. Now, I'll obviously point out that there will be different angles of censorship depending on who individually might be guiding that. But if we think that World Economic Forum, Yaccarino, and oligarch technocrat Elon Musk are any different than everything else we're dealing with, in fact, the same exact dynamics, even them both being Democrats, despite what they tell you now, I just don't think you want to see it. And we have to be honest with ourselves. Now, the anti-Semitism part opens this up even wider. I think this is important. Now, this is, I'm not familiar with the work, online Shogun, making a point about Donald Trump. and what did he call it? I'll just read in a second. I guess he basically just talks about this is genocide in Gaza. Now, to be clear, this video is just him standing, which this is the guy who's doing his transition team, right? And which he's working with Kushner and, he already said, this is going to be the same old thing from the same place. And it's exactly what Daniel McAdams pointed out. It's obvious to me. But my point is that he's just simply doing this thing at some Jewish ceremony. But I quickly looked up, by the way, it's interesting to me. I get mixed responses from different platforms on whether Christians are supposed to wear yarmulkes. Now, some of the current ones say, well, yes, if you're at a dinner party or at an event, ceremony for like this for the Jewish faith, then it's okay for Christians to wear the yarmulke. What's interesting, though, is that there are plenty that say the exact opposite, like harshly. They say, no, that's they're not allowed. It's a violation. Interestingly, though, you never see the other side of that happening, at least in my experience. You don't see the Netanyahus of the world come and do this with Trump and wear a cross or something like that, which I think says a lot. Either way, the point, though, is that this video is just him doing this. So that to be said, I'm not implying that just because someone has Jewish background or does a Jewish ceremony, that therefore it means what he's going to say. Just want to make that clear, because I truly, and you guys know, believe this is about Zionism and not blanket statement Judaism. It overlaps Judaism just like it overlaps Christianity, but it's about Zionism. Of course, I could be wrong, and you have your right to think for yourself, but you will get pushback on me for pretending that I'm secretly wink, wink saying something else, because I'm not. But he says, all right, F this. So this is a Trump supporter who's having his moment. And he says, been supporting Trump since 2015. Elevator speech. He says, my suspended account, which, by the way, is the point we're getting to, at least from, America First org is censored on Twitter, right? So there's an example of censorship under Elon Musk. He says, is a testimony to it, as well as patriots who know me from back then. I cannot in good conscience vote for somebody who supports a genocide in Gaza. I am out. I find that important. So just showing you that people are fed up. Now, I'm going to include this interview I have with Dan Cohen, which I think is powerful. Dan Cohen is a Jewish person himself discussing the problem of Zionism and the way that Zionism is using Judaism. It's important to hear this from people that are have been researching this, that have been a part of it, that see it. Dan has talked about how he's had an involving journey around this just since October 7th. But he said it's entitled The Manufactured Middle East Plight and the Zionism Linchpin. It's powerful. And so the point in that is to recognize that, that conversation and with what we're going to talk about entirely, because the anti-Semitism claim is the linchpin of Zionism. It's how this is, right now it's falling apart, but it's how it has been held together. So Derek Bros points something out. Oh, and here's just a thought, by the way, posting this about the recent speech from Trump and Elon Musk. But Derek says, technocrats unite in the fake election. Actually, I think this should have been moved over to the other segment. I missed it. But either way, technocrats unite in the fake election, he says. On one side, you have Peter Thiel, Elon Musk funded candidate with a record of lying. On the other side, you've got Eric Schmidt and Alex Karp, funded candidate known for nothing. Yeah, see, damn it, this is there's a reason I had this, and it would have been perfect after the one I, set up in this main point to show you that they're the same side on same thing on either side. But I missed it. You see, as I said before, what I always do is I'll line these things up in like a broad category and then take time all day, half the time, organizing them in ways that make it line up. And I just missed this one. So not that I had to tell you that, but that's why this is out of disjointed. But he says, neither will serve the people, but will serve the Zionist lobby and the Bilderberg group. 100% agree with that. And this is who they want you to vote for, either side of it, right? Now, Just a Thought says, a political party of the U.S. is proudly uniting with technocrats like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, bankrolled by Peter Thiel, without so much as a double take from the vast majority of Americans. Concerns about organizations like the World Economic Forum have all but disappeared, and support for all of its policies and more are now stronger than ever. Now, you may not think that, but that's the reality, as Elon Musk is spearheading damn near every one of them, and you're just not paying attention because he's doing it. That's how I would read it anyway. If humans survive centuries from now, she says, this moment in history will prove to be the turning point for the technocracy, the time in which Americans, believing they were fighting for freedom, excitedly applauded their own digital prison. Sadly, there likely won't be any humans to look back on. Now, to anti-Semitism, and the point that in all of this, right, is it's the guise of one side versus the other when really they're both driving for the same thing. That's why I started with that clip from Jordan Peterson. No matter whether we're using the broad case of hate speech or just focusing on one version of what they call hate speech, which is anti-Semitism, and the argument being, as he said, that people, power-hungry people will gravitate to this. That's what we're seeing. You just only, in many cases, people just only want to look at one side of it. So again, I have 2 new clips that I've added to this thread. And I hope that you'll take the time to listen to these, because despite what some of the, I would argue, bots in this chat are trying to pretend, that's not what he said. I mean, it's explicitly exactly what he says, verbatim. And I played the one that was kind of opening for the show before we started, where he says that Congress used to be controlled by Israel, and rightfully so, very clearly. Down here, he goes into 2 others. Now, in fact, I probably should just play that again, since you never know who might have seen what and, might not have seen something. But the point is, we're going to play these to show you what he's discussing. Then I'll play the 2 new ones that gets into his statements that we quoted today for the show.
The biggest change I've seen in Congress is Israel literally owned Congress. You understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. And I think you know exactly what I'm saying. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully, over Congress.
That's pretty terrifying, as always. And again, the point on this episode, or this thread anyway, is that every one of these videos is saying a similar thread of the same conversation. As I say here are clips from Trump's recent campaign trail event, which, by the way, is Israeli flags. And almost every time now, he seems to be introduced by Miriam Adelson. Like, I don't know why this does not concern people. I mean, I guess it only concerns if it was a Chinese military member or something ridiculous like that. But it says, Trump openly states that Israel used to control the U.S. Congress, and he says that it will again when he's president. He also makes it clear that your constitutional rights will not be honored if you criticize Israel. Explicitly. Right? And we just played the clip about the gun discussion, right? Where, well, the people, whoa, your First Amendment, all these people are stupid. That's what he says explicitly about gun rights. Here, Miriam Adelson telling him how he gave them whatever they wanted, gave them the legal Golan Heights, gave them Jerusalem. So now we have multiple new clips on top of these 3 new ones I added recently that say the same thing. Listen to all of them. We've got 2 new ones. This one says Trump saying once again that he will remove the, quote, Jew haters from this country. And as I said, and this is important to hear before you try to make it out that I'm defending people that are racist. First, even as I agree that one who hates another solely due to their religion, in parentheses, Zionists, for example, are abhorrent, hating someone is constitutionally protected, as is expressing that hate despite new arbitrary mandates. And, if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. That is Supreme Court ruling. Mayberry versus Madison. Then it says, second, those deciding what constitutes, quote, Jew hate have already proven to be deliberately dishonest by conflating any Palestinian protest or any criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, which, by the way, we'll get into next, which is easy to prove. Even from The Guardian, anti-defamation, the staff from the ADL speak up about how they're conflating false things with anti-Semitism, or they admit they conflate them with anti-Semitism to hide the real number. This is what they do. So here's the first clip. This is the one we quoted for today.
We will remove the jihadist sympathizers and Jew haters. We're going to remove the Jew haters who do nothing to help our country. They only want to destroy our country.
Now, right there, to be clear, I already see the conversation. People are saying, oh, well, he meant the race, the terrorists. Well, again, you don't know that. You could pretend you want to think that. Maybe he does, though. But the point is, you can't jump to say, here's what he meant, because that's you pretending you know what he thinks and feels. But even if you want to think that, again, if you're not breaking the law, you're allowed to believe what you want. Isn't that what we all pretend in this country? So you're not allowed to remove someone from the country because of a view that they hold, period. So the problem here is that he is clearly trying to drive in that idea. And even if you want to conflate it with real terrorists, like the ones the U.S. government supports all around the world, you'd have to commit a crime for that to make sense. And even then, we're talking about your freedom of speech. Because we're going to get into the reality that what he is talking about is Palestinian protesters, as him and Vance and the rest have called Iran, called Hamas, terrorist constantly. So if you want to pretend he thinks and feels this, then you're simply ignoring what he's actively said over and over.
We'll remove the jihadist sympathizers and Jew haters. We're going to remove the Jew haters who do nothing to help our country. They only want to destroy our country. And we will never let the horrors of October 7th be repeated here on American soil. We will.
And that's a big point, because they really want to seed in your mind that that's coming to America, that they're going to, I mean, I'm surprised there wasn't a false flag yesterday, quite frankly, but they're going to be driving this idea. And we already caught a Mossad element at the border that they tried to pretend was a Palestinian, and then they got exposed that he was actually working with Israel from the past. The Republicans stopped talking about it. We've covered that more than once.
Will not let that happen, and we will solve the problem that we have.
Right. The problem being that you have opinions that people don't, that they don't like. Now, realistically, that could mean that you think Jews are bad. I would call you a disgusting person, but you have a right to think that. You have a right to feel that and say that. That is your constitutional right. And yeah, that's what it means to defend free speech. It means defending the worst speech. But on top of that, we already know what they conflate, which I'll play for you next. But here's the next one. This is another one. These are all rapid succession. Well, so what is that now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I was off by 1. 8 examples. There's probably more, by the way, of him explicitly telling you that Israel should be able to control Congress, that they're going to remove you if you have certain opinions, if it's about Israel. Here's another one. This guy asked him point blank, will you send the Department of Justice to college campuses to stop this? Yes, he says.
Now, let me turn to anti-Semitism in the United States. Your daughter is Jewish. Some of your grandchildren are Jewish. Your son-in-law is Jewish. Jewish students are not safe on many American campuses.
False. In fact, been proven false, even by the people lying about this stuff, even by the media that was covering it briefly. We'll get to that next. And we've already broken this down. There's been major reports showing you that they've blatantly lied or fabricated events. Now, yes, there's anti-Semitism. Yes, there's racism. It exists. But on campus, it's been that's why it's not being hyped as much, because it's been clearly shown they were caught repeatedly faking these events to make this case. And even people like this are citing the numbers from the ADL to make the claim that it's an exploding rise. They're using Palestinian protests and Palestinian flags to claim anti-Semitism. So this is a false claim.
Semitism is Jewish. Jewish students are not safe on many American campuses. Your alma mater, my alma mater. Biden and Harris have ignored this. I mean, they really have ignored it.
No. I hate them just as much as anybody else, but they haven't, because it's not real. And they're absolutely, what's happening is they have talked about it, despite these people pretending they're ignoring it. This is the game that always happens. They attack it. They call for censorship. They scream about how anti-Semitism can't exist. Trump does the same thing. They just pretend like they didn't do enough. But they're both doing the same thing. They're both supporting Israel. It's just funny how that works. You're just not aggressive enough about censoring, therefore you hate Jews. It's just, in reality, they're both calling for the same thing. It's crazy.
If you're president, will you send the DOJ to those campuses, the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education, to enforce the law?
Okay, so to be clear, will you send the Department of Justice and other entities to what he just set up the question about, stop what he claims is anti-Semitism? And so what he then says is to enforce the law, which of course will give people that want to ignore it. Well, he didn't say that. He said the law. And of course we should enforce the law. Well, anybody would agree with that, but you damn well know what they're talking about. And the reality is that in their minds, the law is you're not allowed to say things about Israel. There's already, or even right this moment, there's a bill that is about to pass within our Congress that says that any criticism of Israel at all, or Zionism, is anti-Semitism and it's against the law, even though that is repugnant to the Constitution, which means it's null and void. Which is one of the many ways I show you often that just because it's a law does not make it legal or constitutional. That which means we're living under an illegitimate entity that doesn't care about your constitutional rights as the guiding principle of everything we do. They don't care. They've ignored it, even though they swear an oath to it, right? But the point is clear. You're going to stop them from saying things because you deem that illegal. Here's what Trump says.
100%. I mean,
if you're president, will you send the DOJ to those campuses, the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education, to enforce the law?
100%. I mean, the
100%.
law is being broken. 100%.
It's not, though. It's simply not. Even, in fact, legitimately not right now. I mean, I even that's a bad way to frame it, because I don't think it's a legitimate law in the first place because it's repugnant to the Constitution. But I mean that there's not even technically a law in place that says you're not allowed to say something anti-Semitic. They love to try to make these cases. They love to try to put guidelines on platforms about hate speech, but it's technically not. And even if they did pass something, which should be outrageous to you as an attack on constitutional rights being driven by a foreign government, that it still would not be valid. But he said 100%. You know, just like he will give them land that's not theirs, just like he will allow them to move an embassy that has no right to. Everything. assassinate foreign leaders under a diplomatic guise. That's what terrorism looks like.
You wouldn't think you even have this. Did you ever think 2 years ago, 3 years ago that you'd ever have this discussion?
No,
it's unbelievable.
You know how dumb that is, seeing as how 2 and 3 years ago they were screeching about the same problem? So all they're doing is, Trump loves to do that. He loves to be hyperbolic and make it seem like we've never, ever seen anything like this in the history of anything he's talking about. Yes, they were. Go back and look for yourself. 3 years before that, they were doing the same thing. Screaming about anti-Semitism. You know why? Because Israel was paying them to do it. So it's a lie. And they both know that, but they go, yeah, like never. I never would have thought, even though we had the same conversation 3 years ago.
What's happening? And when you see these riots, and you see a lot of people too.
Riots. You see my point? Riots. This is not like the Black Lives Matter conversation, okay, where you could easily show that they were deliberately misrepresenting what they, well, in fact, it is the same thing in reverse, where the left would refuse to call them violent things. Here, I mean, there's been entire studies done. There's been information coming from the highest levels of power in whether it's the colleges, whether it's international bodies, human rights groups, they're showing you that these people have been lied about. They're proving to you, or policemen in front of Congress going, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. And yet Stefanik and the rest just keep repeating it. It's a construct. Again, there is racism, but what they put forward was a blatant lie. And the reality was even documented that almost every time I saw these, and that's not to say that there weren't individual examples of violence, but they were clearly acting nonviolent, getting hit, attacked. And the moment there was a response of any kind, even nonviolent, they would frame that as an attack over and over and over and over. Now, I guarantee people that don't want to hear this will pretend like that's not the case, but it's a verifiable fact.
But you know, a lot of the people in that, a lot of those people are Jewish people. You know that. They're Jewish kids.
Oh, yeah, there are some outliers, but most.
No, you see, he didn't like that. See, Trump loves to play. I think Trump just doesn't like this guy. You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to admit that there were most of them were Jewish. And that was easy to prove because we're talking about the groups that were actually driving most of this, which were Jewish Voices for Peace. What was the other one? I have it come up in a second. I forget, major Jewish organizations that were driving these protests. And as we've shown you many times, the examples of, for example, a Holocaust survivor. Many of them. I mean, in fact, he just spoke out again recently, but they have an entire group of them wearing signs that they're there to stand with the Palestinian people. And they want you, well, there's outliers. No, it was led by Jewish people.
A Holocaust survivor. My message to the brave student protesters in America is just keep doing it. Don't give up. We are doing exactly the same. And in the long term, we are going to prevail.
There's a lot of these, guys. There's a lot. So what's funny to me is how they want to deflect it well. And so the point of Trump pointing out there were Jewish people is not supposed to make sense because they want you to think it's unsafe for Jews. Well, okay, well then why were there a vast majority of Jews in this population, whether it was Colombia or anywhere else? And guys, this is a provable fact as well. Like you can look, I just showed you one of the speeches. You can watch them where they're literally standing up. I mean, here, there's one.
Out.
Oops, hit that wrong. Just one more really quickly, since I brought it up and I'm going off on it. This is another example, and this I won't play the whole thing, but showing you another student who's telling you, look, I went and I sat down with them, and I mean, even Michael Tracy, for example, keep going. He went to all of them, and we're saying, I'm a Jewish person, and there's no problem. It's just it's embarrassing how often they're lying about this stuff.
Come have some matzah. Come have some matzo ball soup. We're having a great time. We got plenty to go for everyone, and we'll be out here having a really lovely holiday.
Columbia University has been at the centre of pro-Palestinian protests for more than a week. Safety concerns have been raised by Jewish students on campus, but as Passover week begins, a group of Jewish and non-Jewish protesters have gathered at the university to celebrate.
There is nowhere else I should be for Passover besides here on campus.
You get where it goes. I mean, they go on to explicitly state that there's no danger here, that everyone's like, they just lied about it.
Afraid to outliers, but mostly Jewish students are afraid to.
That's the narrative, but it's not true.
Be overt on places like Harvard and Penn.
That are afraid. Yes, that's true, and they should be afraid. I've never thought I would
see these people are grifters, man. They're lying to you.
See this in my life with the campus riots and what they're saying and what they're doing.
Yeah, what they're saying is explicitly protected speech. And even whatever you think they're saying, on top of that, they're saying things like "Long live the Intifada," right? Which means revolution. So are we going to start calling the American Revolution a terrorist act? Or, I mean, what are we going to do here? They've lost the plot. I think people are starting to pay attention.
And they have to put them down quickly. They really have to put them down.
Oh, so put them down, right? So stop them. Like Josh Hawley was saying, you can't condemn this. How else do you think they're going to put this down? You guys know.
They need federal help, though, and that's the Department of Justice. They need a Department of Justice that will prosecute these people that assault Jewish kids.
See,
because assault is that's real. That's not.
Yeah, assault is a crime. But I'd love to. Like, are we talking about the time when that woman got stabbed in the eye with a flag, even though that was a complete fabrication and they got proven to do so? Or, I mean, what are we? There's so many examples of these false narratives, over and over and over. My point, long-winded, is the reality that they are absolutely driving the idea that they need to stop you from saying what they say is anti-Semitism. Even though we've proven that 90% of what we're seeing out there, if not entirely, are, well, we'll make this point right now. Here is The Guardian. This is from 8 months ago. This is 8 months ago. Anti-Defamation League staff decry, quote, dishonest campaign against Israel critics. That's from the ADL staff. Here is this all Rod pointing out the New Republic. Seems vital to mention in the post that it's the ADL's report whose director compared the Palestinian kippah to a swastika. The ADL officially has admitted, and this is public information, that it counts pro-Palestinian activism as anti-Semitic. They all agree with it. They don't care. You have a flag, you're anti-Semitic. That's not the truth, though. Anybody honest already knows this. And frankly, it's obvious to see that it's the vast majority of the world. So here's an example of this. I'm not familiar with this guy, but he seems to be one of these people screaming about anti-Semitism in every corner. Hundreds of terror supporters, otherwise known as people protesting to stop a genocide, including Jews and Israelis. But, apparently only Zionists, you get the point, are the ones that are on the right side. And it says, walk out of class to intimidate the Jewish student display. Oh, is that what it is? Intimidate them with roses and Palestine and self-determination and free Gaza, free speech. Woo, terrorist stuff, man. I mean, how is this not being ridiculed everywhere? Intimidate the Jewish students with a display of peace? It's sad. And of course, it's only because on October 7th. Well, yes, obviously, because whatever went down this day, including the Hannibal Directive or Hamas's legal act of armed resistance, and then crimes that they committed after that, all started now a multi-stage genocide. It says every single faculty member that is present should be immediately fired. These people are caricatures. And here this person adds, it's like wearing an SS armband to protest the Holocaust. Again, worthy of ridicule. Not only are they shockingly uninformed and just I think willfully ignorant, you're simply saying that somebody wearing a symbol of Palestinian resistance is a terrorist because you've identified it as Nazis, even though Israel literally worked with the Nazis. They're literally arming a Nazi group in Ukraine. But, let's forget all the facts and highlight the fact that this person's screaming for rights, for equal rights and self-determination and lack of occupation and, not murdering children. Terrorist! It's pathetic. My point in all of this is to show you that people like Trump and Kamala are screaming about censoring you if you dare to point any of this out. So here's Jennifer however you pronounce that, Jablonowski, showing you the clip I just played, telling you that we're going to remove the Jew haters, or Trump says this, and she says, well, guess I'm not voting, which you can take that however you want. I think the reality is that people recognize that means censorship of your rights. Or censorship and violation of your rights. And Ian Carroll says, yeah, fucking hell, man. Excuse me. Oops, I didn't mean to cuss right there. Effing hell. I mean, whatever you think about anybody, I'm trying to show you that even people, not even anyone in this conversation, just people that are on the far right, far left, everybody can sense there's a problem here. I mean, the point really to make is that there are conservatives that are going, whoa, okay. There's no way you can kind of wiggle out of this. Oh, you took him out of context. You didn't mean that. Nope. As he literally got introduced by Miriam Adelson again. I guess, are we still at the point where we're asking? I mean, look, okay. When I first brought this up, everybody was like, no, that was a special thing for them. Okay. Over and over and over, Trump is having campaign rallies for Trump and Vance with Israel flags behind him. Like right now. Why is that normal? It's not. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with people around you. Call out people that are pretending this is not a big deal. Okay. He is literally standing there being introduced by an Israeli, I mean, whatever you want, an oligarch, but not, I mean, it's not really even a lobbyist. She's an individual private oligarch that is funding his campaign, a stated purpose to allow annexation of the West Bank, which is a crime. Everybody knows that. So he agreed, just like Golan Heights was a crime. And she introduces him yet again, over and over, with Israeli flags behind him. I find that to be pretty crazy, and it should be. So my point is, obviously, guys, if you haven't picked it up yet, they're both going to be censoring you. They're both going to be doing so. They're both doing it now. Moderation was the solution from Clinton. Moderation is what they're doing now. If you can't connect these dots, you don't want to. And I think that people out there who probably would connect the dots are just going to, miraculously not just see this show or have this pop up in their feed, which is usually how the other side of this game works. But get it in front of people that need to see it because they're out there. Whether, the algorithmic gaming on Twitter and elsewhere are designed to make sure that you stay in certain bubbles. Put this in front of people. Clip these parts out. Get it in front of people that need to see it. Now, another couple points on this segment I just think is interesting. This Visegrad 24 account that just lies constantly. It's been caught lying in multiple categories or discussions since I've seen this existence. During, obviously, ongoing throughout the genocide that they keep getting caught lying for. But this was the one that floated that claim that Elon shared under Venezuela. And then it was proven to be false. This is an Israeli propaganda entity. It's not a news organization. It's sad. But here we are where they're promoting another interestingly aligned idea that Israel's pushing. So this is actually pretty funny. Iran's crown prince. This is actually how they frame it. Reza Pahlavi, who, by the way, is the son of the puppet that was put in place, the Shah, or is the son or a relative? I think it's the son, right? Is the time anyway? The stand-in puppet for the U.S. and Israeli regime change apparatus. Because suddenly they think that we're now leaning towards people wanting regime change in Iran? You guys have lost the plot. The world is clearly seeing what you're doing. Because you've got a small segment of the U.S. population frothing at the mouth to overthrow Iran again, does not mean that this guy speaking on Twitter is going to change people's opinions. But he's standing up going, and his important speech, they say, he's ready to lead the transition to democracy in Iran. They have a democratic state right now, despite the the screeches coming from partisan liars. Now, limited, if you will, if you want, but if you pretend that we live in a democracy, you're just as ridiculous. So if you want to call what we have a democracy, you're damn right they live in a democracy. So let's pretend, and again, we shouldn't want either of those things. But here we are where this guy's standing up, calling out to people saying, we want to change this. And is that what Iranians are calling for? No. This is the guy that connects to the Shah, who was a person put in power by Operation Ajax, a illegal regime change of a foreign country, though it's public knowledge at this point. And they removed the people in power. They put the person in power that caused devastation, destruction, and chaos for the average people. But there's a really nice, oligarch circle where it was really nice to live in Iran. The Israelis and the U.S. and the Iranians that were okay with giving up and selling out their country. And that's what they show you, right? You look back and, look at how great it was in Iran. No, they're showing you just like they would show you any other country that they overthrow and destroy, the ones they want you to see. The point is, it's easy to prove the country was horrifying for people that were actually not in line with the Israeli and U.S. agenda. Just like it is horrible in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria for the people that are under the attacks or the occupation of the U.S. government. Visegrad said, he's going to change everything. Kim says, LOL, a prince from a monarchy wanting to bring forward democracy. People buy this? Can you be more stupid? So I agree. But I think it's just desperation. I think they're making moves because they know they're losing. On the point of occupation, by the way, whether it's Syria, Iraq, or anything else we're talking about, Richard simply points out, why does the Western mainstream media never mention the American occupied territories in Syria? Well, I want you to think about the idea of what they call terrorism. First of all, let's recognize this is illegal, no matter what, but they're objectively illegal. The U.S. just has a narrative on why they're there. They honestly don't ever go but it's, we're legally. They just have a loophole. They argue with their, whatever it was, the Patriot Act or whatever the extension was, the idea, the War Powers Act, we're going after the terrorists, and then just expand that out to whatever they say. The truth is that's a loophole. Even that does not legally take away the reality that you're still maintaining an illegal occupation of a foreign country. They know that. They just don't care. But also Turkey and also Israel, as you well know, in the Golan Heights. These are all illegal occupations. They're all there illegally. And the U.S. is just having a massive oil siphoning operation they've been doing for a very long time. So why is that talked about? Why is that not discussed? Well, you know why. But what I want to point out is that every element of terrorism that we know exists in this area, just magically seems to be in the places that are not controlled by Syria. It's very easy to prove. And of course, they would just call the Syrian government and the Syrian military terrorists like they would about the Iranian military and the Iranian government, even though it's not true. But if you want to easily highlight the terrorist hotbed that even McGurk pointed out in Al-Tanf, well, that's obvious. Or how about the idea, or no, not Al-Tanf, it was, it's been a while since we've talked about the Syria conversation. The other location we've talked about from Brett McGurk. Actually, I might still have it. Let me see if I got that clip. Let me see. I wish you guys remember Idlib. There it is, Idlib. So Idlib, I just saw the name on a file. I didn't get the video. But so in Idlib, we're talking about that even Brett McGurk said it's the largest hotspot ever. Well, we now know for a fact that Turkey and the United States government are actively involved with that conversation in that location and working with terrorists, or Al-Tanf, Al-Rukban camp, which is basically a concentration camp, or at least it was. I mean, where this is this point, things could have changed at a time where they were holding Syrians and a growing hotbed of terrorism. This was covered by even corporate media in some abstract ways. It's not, or Golan Heights, where they've proven to have given treatment to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So, my point in always, as we get into the larger conversation of Israel and starting with the Cosgrove clip of just, we're done with the BS, guys. We need to be done with the BS. We need to be done playing games with liars and grifters, acting like, well, they're have a lot of standing and influence, like from Just a Thoughts article, so they must be trusted good people. No, they're not. They likely have standing and influence in a broken, corrupt system because they're broken and corrupt, and lean into it. That can't always be it's not, broad stroke everybody. But my bottom line point is that if we can look at Afghanistan and see who they paid, worked with, and illegally occupied, or in Syria, who we can say the moderate rebels, or what they, people they fund, or who they armed, or that they're illegally occupying it and stealing oil, or Iraq, who continues to try to push them out and they refuse, and they arm and they give Israel fake passports to allow them into the country, which we've talked about, or overthrowing of Libya and destroying the country when it was clearly on the path to better the people's lives there, the highest quality of life in all of Africa, free education, free healthcare. Oh, but to go back to Nar, destroy it. Liberation. Or overthrowing the Bosnia, that too in the past, but the Bolivia government for lithium. And Elon Musk says, we'll coup whoever we want. Yeah, because they're the oligarch. They are the machine. Or on and on and on. And overthrow attempts on Venezuela, or bombing in the Sudan, both Trump and everybody else, or, just on and on. Is that what good guys do? At what point do we recognize that they're not actually going after anything but people that they've funded or things that they've stolen? Hope that's clear. So on this point, recognize that if you're going to look where the bad things are, it's where they are. Now, lastly, Ryan Grimm just points this out, and we haven't gotten into this in depth recently, have in the past. But this guy says, history is being made in Pakistan. People have broken the shackles of fear. They are defying corrupt generals. All congressmen, congressional aides, and CIA experts need to update their softwares. Stop ruling Pakistan through the likes of General Asim Munar. Let democracy deliver. So Ryan Grimm makes an excellent point. So right now you're seeing this happen in Pakistan. But ask yourself why you haven't heard about this. Isn't it usually when there's a revolution or a protest for freedom that the U.S. jumps on? Well, no. In fact, it's usually when they manufacture it. You rarely see these things when they don't want you to see them, when they're natural. You see them when it's going, look at the Azov movement fighting for freedom, when they manufactured it. Oh, my God, look at them fighting for freedom. Assad shot protesters. No, he didn't. They lied about it. We now prove that. Not we, being like international community. As always, they want you to see it. Look at Venezuela. They're fighting for freedom. No, they're throwing Molotov cocktails on trucks full of barbed wire, pretending it's humanitarian aid. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably haven't seen the shows. But the point is that they lie about it. But then when there's a real pushback, you rarely see it. He says, one way you can tell the CIA is not behind the current protests in Pakistan is the total absence of any coverage in the Western press. Typically, a pro-democracy movement like this against a military dictatorship is celebrated. But in this case, the military is our ally, so we don't talk about it. Like we've seen everywhere. The coup in 2009 in Honduras, or, literally everywhere else we could talk about. Just recognize this is who we're dealing with, guys, and we can change it. Not by voting in oligarch flavor 1 or oligarch flavor 2, but by finding something different. by maybe standing up where it's needed. Drop Site points this out. Here's what Liam Cosgrove said to Matt Miller.
Still poised to strike Iran. And in July, Blinken said that Iran was 1 to 2 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. So
false. Proven false, by the way. I already showed you the reality of the IAEA, even the State Department themselves. They're not doing that. Yes, they're increasing enrichment, but to this day, they're still legally allowed to because of the violation of the JCPOA that they've never tried to rectify. They could. There's been a lot of things proposed. They just don't because they like the idea of pointing to that and pretending, playing on your ignorance, that they're somehow violating something. And that's even ignoring the reality that every country in the world has the legal right, it seems, to go after nuclear weapons except Iran or North Korea, but too late they did it. So now we pretend it's not a problem, even though now they have, which continues to show you that that's why they try to in some cases, because that shows you a change in policy. Iran has stated, religiously speaking, they will not because it's against their religion. Doesn't mean I would buy that at face value. Maybe things have changed. Clearly, they're being threatened. But the reality is that all of the evidence, save for politicians and genociders, aside from those kind of elements, everything else shows you they are not and have not reached that level or aren't even seeking to. Just make sure you clear that.
That Iran was 1 to 2 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. So I guess for all we know, they might have one by now. And meanwhile, in Ukraine...
Just to be clear, he's making that point to set the stage for his comment. Sorry to stop it again. I'll let it play. But he's just setting the point that there is a nuclear threat, at least by your statements. So therefore, what you're doing is dangerous. That's what he's trying to get at.
They've struck deep within Russian territory several times, as deep as 300 miles from the border. And in that case, we don't have to guess. We know that Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, as many as 6,000 warheads. And so one of the risks of arming militaries that are striking in the territories of nuclear powers is that one of those gets deployed and then it could escalate very quickly from there. So it's rarely discussed, but it's important to address that the nuclear risk is real, and it could very abruptly mean the end of what humans have worked for thousands of years to collectively achieve. And us today are very lucky to live with the fruits of that achievement, and I feel like we're treating the risks kind of brazenly. So my question for you is, we often hear in response to these concerns that, well, Putin, Khomeini, they're war criminals, they're terrorists, as if they're too inherently evil or immoral for us to negotiate with. But meanwhile, this administration has financed a genocide in Gaza for the last year, and every day you're up there denying accountability for it. So, I mean, what gives you the right to lecture other countries on their moral...
So if you have a...
Now, before he comments, you all know that that's a valid question. They don't like the premise because it ultimately highlights that they're the problem. But see, the question is very simple. But removing the opening where let's lay it out. He's simply saying, what gives you the right to lecture Iran or anybody else when you are literally funding a genocide? Like that is the valid question. They will just he has no other action than pretending like it's so outrageous, I can't even engage. But I think that in and of itself is important. Now watch how he responds.
Every day you're up there denying accountability for it. So, I mean, what gives you the right to lecture other countries on their moral...
So if you have a policy question for me, I'm happy to take it. If you want to give a speech, there are plenty of places in Washington where you can give a speech.
Yeah, but people are sick of the bullshit in here. I mean, like, it is a genocide. You are abetting it, and you are risking nuclear war in Ukraine for this proxy war.
Plenty of other places to give a speech. Go ahead.
Thank you, what a coward.
On their moral...
So if you have a policy question for me, I'm happy to take it. If you want to give a speech, there are plenty of places in Washington where you can give a speech.
Yeah, but people are sick of the bullshit in here. I mean, like, it is a genocide. You are abetting it, and you are risking nuclear war in Ukraine for this proxy war.
Plenty of other places to give a speech. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. By the way, I love that last part, which just shows you the rest of the go along to get along, access journalism. Like, listen to the end.
Places to give a speech. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Right? Like, so everyone, like, what they should do is stand up in unison and be like, answer his question, right? We are the ones controlling the conversation. You don't get to dictate what we can ask and how. What is the answer? But this guy, thank you, Matt. Now on to what you'd like to talk about, Matt. That's like, we should make fun of those people. You're a child and well, I shouldn't say that because who knows if maybe he next jumped into it. My point is that we do know in a general sense that most people in that room, they would rather maintain their position and their influence than challenge what's going on. So they're not journalists. That's important. But I think it's important to recognize, like, something I've said in the past, by the way, is obviously I do agree, I would argue that there is a level of decorum that is important in any context. Just because I think that bringing yourself down to a level that is more childish or more what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I think the uncouth, if you will, the idea of holding decorum in certain positions is important. But the reason I feel that that's different, this is my opinion, as always, is that what he's doing right there is using the inflection of it to sort of call this out. And then, and then ultimately falls back. I mean, I think that is the best way you could have done that, because anything else can get framed as, trying to be grand. Because what he did, and despite Matt's, almost that's the best point to make, is that Matt would have loved to try to make that out to be some kind of a bombastic move, like, you're grandstanding or you're doing this to get attention, and that's what I already see people trying to frame it as, who want to support what's going on in Israel. But he did it perfectly, because he asked a valid question. It was point blank. And he used the words to inflict, to kind of put an edge to it. And then, it was well done. Simple as that. And I think what this starts the conversation of is that there are people out there that might not have considered that even those in this room are just tired of it. We're tired of pretending to, looking you face to face while you sit here and tell us things that we all know are not true, which, by the way, is what they always do. But we're dealing with a genocide right now. While they're sitting there, they know children are starving to death. While they're sitting there, according to the doctors, the children are being shredded. And I think some of them are just not okay with that. Thank God. We have some human beings in there, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see. So let's talk about, starting with this Robert's recent article. So again, from here forward, we're pretty much going to go over some of the things we talked about in the past, some of which is new, some of which are going over again. But we're going to go over some of these topics that I think this is what we're talking about. We're tired of the BS. Let's just stop pretending, which all of us are already pretty much doing, but those out there might be new, or you have somebody in your circles that are hiding from this. Let's stop pretending like we don't know for a fact everything we're going to talk about next. To start, though, on the idea of how they lie deliberately, both the U.S. government for Israel or any other context, but Israel explicitly today. Robert put this out today. Debunking Israel's new campaign linking Hamas to ISIS, again, trying to justify annexation of the north of Gaza, which I'll point out at the end, seems to be ongoing. And this is an important discussion. You might have seen this circulating. Well, maybe not, because it's weird how it seems that other than the New York Post and the Jerusalem Post and most Western platforms, really tried to ignore this. You know why? Because it's easy to prove it's a lie. So what this is supposed to be is let me pronounce it properly. A Yazidi, that's the background, where they're from, Yazidi, a slave, they're calling it, who is apparently, they claim, held by ISIS and then moved to Gaza to Hamas, they're working together. Now, what's interesting as you dive into this, and I'm not going to go through it entirely, just make sure you read it, that this, according to the data that came from even the sources that they're citing, and the groups that are working with this, there's a guy who's an Israeli who's pretending that they carried out a secret mission to save this woman. Well, the Yazidi groups, the campaigns are speaking up and saying, well, we don't, basically calling him out as a liar, saying, we don't think you're doing anything. You're not rescuing the people you're claiming to rescue. And they called him out for it. And suddenly his website's being deleted and the GoFundMe's getting removed. My point is, when you dig through this, you find out that the guy is in fact pretending to rescue Yazidi individuals and taking in funds and not doing that. And then it turns out this woman was not taken, that she was married. She married somebody and then went on her own accord and again, this is all proven. And there's actual statements from Hamas, but that's not what we're using to make this case. It's actually cited by Reuters, by the way, but either way, we're talking about the factual basis from groups in every dynamic of this, showing you that this woman was simply essentially assisted by the group that they're calling out, and that ultimately it was by her own accord, and that she simply came back. But on top of that, that the guy is the core lie that's even being called out by Western press in some cases of ISIS and Hamas is embarrassing. They're ideologically different, and ISIS has declared Hamas an enemy more than once. They even provably removed them from these locations. It's just crazy. All of this is to say that comes down to the idea that they're just trying to patch together the idea that ISIS is Hamas, which they're going to use to, he argues, to try to justify the annexation of northern Gaza, which they currently occupy, legally speaking, but they're actually going to physically take it as they already have across the middle. But it's an important discussion. It's worthy, this gets into the idea, Well, I mean, I probably should just go through this, but for time, I chose not to highlight it and go through it because it's going to take a lot of time. But it's important for you to read. I was going to try to find this one part, but I'll come back to it later. You make sure you read this because the overall reality is that even like the only thing in this that drives this lie is the Jerusalem Post and then the New York Post taking something from that's already been proven to be false, by the way, and then just making it, exacerbating it. And that's what they do. Sad. Another example, Israel claims to have captured several Hezbollah strongholds and tunnels in southern Lebanon, loaded with weapons, we're told. They showed an Israeli-made machine gun and a Jeep, which I guess you could argue they just stole, right? But which strangely has an inscription in Hebrew that they forgot to remove, which suggested another propaganda video. Yeah, but yeah, you could argue they stole it somehow. Certainly possible. But what's interesting is that these are the hallmarks we continue to see. Where, oh, look, it's things that they stole. What was the gun example where you find it? Oh, it looks like that's no, that wasn't it. The gun was behind the MRI machine that we have BBC catching them, bringing in guns after the fact, like just clumsy, terrible stuff, or a terror calendar or a terror fan. But there was the example where they kept, I think it was what was that? Remind me in the chat. There's so many of them, it just blends together. But where they made a video like this and then somebody caught in it. Oh, that's right. It was they said there was a computer, except there was Hebrew keys on the computer, or there's things like that. They just keep getting caught lying. But this is just another example of them pretending. And right now in Lebanon, which we're going to get to, it is overwhelming how it's just whole cloth, just the whole narrative, just dumping it over Lebanon, despite the fact that it doesn't even line up. No, I mean, everything for that matter, we know they're lying about, but many examples of this, you just can't translate from Gaza to Lebanon, and they're doing it anyway. It's pretty horrifying what's going on. Before we get there, I want to show you some things like this that connect with the same conversation. It's the same guy, by the way, who seems to be getting more and more prominent, at least in my feed, which I don't, this is what's funny to me. I don't follow this guy. I don't engage with his content, but all of a sudden I start seeing him every day on this is what Twitter is doing. Either way, breaking masked Hamas members, which I don't know how in the world you think you know that they're Hamas or what he's just using it to say what he wants you to think about it, beat a Palestinian man in front of his children. So it's just this random video of 3 guys beating a guy and you can't see what's going on. Like everything else. It says, for all those people calling themselves pro-Palestinian and waving a flag, this is what you support. How do you even make such a clumsy argument? So let's just even say that they are Hamas members. Palestinian flag is not Hamas. Secondarily, even if it was, 3 people doing this in one example means everyone does that. Like this is the kind of baseless, fact-free arguments you keep getting. And just broad stroke, assumption. It's just so sad that we can see how clearly this is why I tend to think that there's only people that are invested in this that are still going along with this stuff. And then you get like the same kind of engagement on all these things. But here's the point. Remember this? Which again this is an older video. It's verifiable. These are IDF members kidnapping a child that's clearly Palestinian and using him as a human shield. This is an old story. It's very easy to prove. So do you notice a similarity there, or is that just me? What I'm going to point out here, now again, who knows? You could argue these are Hamas. My point is, we don't know. I can't definitively tell you who's under those masks because I'm not stupid like these people. But what I can tell you is what you'll notice in any context, and also look at their color of their skin, kind of a good indication on top of that. But either way, Hamas dresses very deliberately for a reason, but they also dress in, civilian garb when they want to blend in, like any, guerrilla type concept. But what I tend to never see in most cases are that kind of clothing. Now the mask you'll see, but it usually goes along with something else because the mask calls out that there's something, right? They're typically, in my experience, in like guerrilla blending with civilians, or they're in their Hamas uniforms. So this is a mixed ground there where you got the mask where you can say, see Hamas, but not. So they're showing that they're Hamas by wearing a mask, but weirdly not wearing the uniform. Now, I guarantee there's examples in the middle. But what you'll notice is anytime you do see IDF going in under operations, you'll see them dressing like this when they're not trying to show themselves. And this is very easy to prove. So it's pretty hard to miss that overlap. It's like the Patriot Front and FBI. But on top of that, I should have actually grabbed this earlier. See if it pops up. There's plenty of examples. Well, we even just saw the IDF raiding the hospital dressed like Palestinian civilians. We saw them do that after the pier, where they raided another place dressed like Palestinian civilians. Yeah, this right here shows IDF parading scores of Palestinian men around. That's the human shield aspect. But you can see many examples throughout the past of them dressing up like Hamas. Let me just do that. I may not pop it right now, but this we've talked about this many times. And then using that to infiltrate, which is what they just did. So all I'm saying is think about how obvious it is to just dump these videos out when I think the evidence is pretty clearly in the opposite. But this is how it works. Now, the example we just showed you to start this off was obviously an example of using a human shield, which is a classically old IDF has a procedure called the neighbor procedure, which you guys well know. That is a human shield procedure. It's been called up by human rights groups. And even before that, it was more explicitly human shield dynamic, and they were told to stop it. So they said, okay, we'll stop it. And they instituted the neighbor procedure, which was then simply called human shield as well. So Zachary Foster, who has a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, breaks down a very excellent thread showing you all the many different examples going back before and post October 7th, a brief history of Israel's use of human shields. I'll include this article I did, The Open Secret of Israel's Use of Human Shields, where you can see one blatant example right there, which before October 7th. Dan Cohen says Israel's command and control centers are located in densely populated cities where its residents are used as human shields. Yet Iran managed to strike those centers without killing a single Israeli soldier or civilian human shield. Think about that. Meanwhile, which is even Israel has claimed that, zero. Meanwhile, Israel lies and claims Hamas command and control centers are under hospitals, inside schools, shelters, IDP camps, then calls the civilians human shields and drops thousands of bombs on them without ever proving the actual shield dynamic or the tunnel. Israel's genocidal regime that deceives at every turn. And Iran is intervening to put an end to this crimes against humanity. I agree with that. That doesn't mean good guy. Iran has plenty of problems we can point out, but I think that's a fundamental objective reality of what's happening right now. Now, here, we're going to get into some Haaretz articles, but I guess I'll play this really quickly since we're talking about it. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023. This is from 2017. Generally, human shields. Since the beginning of the occupation in 1967, Israeli security forces have repeatedly used Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as human shields. Israeli soldiers routinely use Palestinian civilians as human shields by forcing them to carry out life-threatening tasks. It was also following a high court petition against this practice, which was filed by human rights organizations around the world in May 2002, that the IDF issued a general order prohibiting the use of Palestinians as a means of human shield against gunfire or attacks by the Palestinian side. But then it goes on to say, following the order, the use of human shields dropped sharply. However, the army did not construe as a human shield the use of Palestinians, provided they consented. The army continued the widespread use of this practice, which they referred to as the neighbor procedure. Following another petition filed by human rights organizations, the High Court of Justice ruled that this practice, too, violated international humanitarian law and that this thus was illegal. And guess what they've never stopped doing? Here is the Institute for Middle East Understanding, the neighbor procedure, Israel's use of Palestinian human shields from 2012. Human Rights Watch. During military operations, Israeli soldiers routinely coerced Palestinian civilians, including children, to perform life-endangering acts that assisted military operations, the practice known as the neighbor procedure. Right, exactly what we've seen, 7 or 8 times since October 7th, like flagrant, even called out by The Guardian and others, where they tied the guy to the truck and it literally melted his skin on the truck, and then they killed him later, by the way. If you don't remember that story, they shot him later. That's what they do. Well, this is my point, the Liam Cosgrove point. We're done with the BS. And it's infuriating to pretend that these maniacs who are either willfully ignorant or actually ignorant or pro-Zionist are hiding this. This is from Haaretz. I mean, all of these except one from The Guardian. And again, realize that there are so many more from Amnesty, from Human Rights Watch, from B'Tselem, many of which I just showed you in that clip. But I thought it was important to show you directly from Israeli media. And these are just some. I mean, I had to stop because there's so many I could have pulled up. Here's Haaretz from 2012. Does the presence of IDF's headquarters in Tel Aviv endanger city's population? Just to overlap with what Dan said, the answer is yes. Everyone seemed to agree with that. Here, Haaretz, this is the most recent one. This is from August of this year. This is a big one. Haaretz investigation. Israeli army uses Palestinian civilians to inspect potentially booby-trapped tunnels in Gaza. That is the actual definition of human shields. But it goes back from there. This one's 2024. Oh, this is the same August 2024. Israel's use of human shields on the battlefield is a war crime. That's Haaretz from this year. Israeli media. Here, this one goes back to, again, I thought this went further back. This is from July 2024. Israeli soldiers filmed using detainees in Gaza as human shields from the leading Israeli newspaper. Here's The Guardian from August as well. Israeli forces in Gaza use civilians as human shields against possible booby traps. That's the larger one we pointed out. This is from 2013. Again, there's so many. Like, it looks like just the earliest ones I was grabbing. UN Palestinian children tortured, used as human shields by Israel. Now, if they happen to get away after being kidnapped or used as human shields while they're kidnapped, here's what you find. People like this, who are taken, who are healthy, come back like that. This is what we're dealing with right now. And we know we see this. Anybody honest with themselves have seen far too many provable examples to pretend this is not real. So let's talk about claims like the rapist regime, right? Or the idea of, the outrage about how they have a British citizen or an American citizen, or the lies around it. But the rapist regime, one of the most provably debunked lies around this entire thing. Here's Elon Levy from October 5th saying the Hamas rapist regime, which again, we should all laugh about how stupid it is that he keeps saying that stupid thing, even if it was real, but then realizing that they've been proven 45 times over, even by Israeli media, by the United Nations, by human rights groups, that that's not what happened. He says the Hamas rapist regime is still holding a British citizen. Oh, it is, huh? I guess you don't care about the ones Israel have killed? Funny how that only works one way. We'll come to that. He says, what is the UK government doing about it? I mean, think about how selective that outrage is. Okay, well, let's talk about the rapist regime. You might find this horrifying, if not fascinating. And let's realize again, a brief selection of things that go back decades. This one actually kind of blew my mind. Because I've seen these about I think it was at one point it was 1 in 4 of people, women in the IDF were sexually assaulted. Then, and they made a big report about it, right? A few years later, it was 1 in 2. Not making that up. I've already covered it on the show. So showing you that they reported it and it only got worse. Now you can read into that however you want. Jerusalem Post, 2021. I just can't even believe this number. 100% of foreign agriculture workers were sexually assaulted. Experts say in Israel, 100%. Like, same point that making anything. I find it impossible to believe that it was actually 100%. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure it is possible, but from any context, that's usually, for instance, if it was okay, right, so 654 of them. Far more likely that a number that kind of thing that they could all have been sexually assaulted. But if you take a big thing of this country, 100%, I find it very difficult to believe that's possible. Or that, mathematically speaking or anything, 100%. It's very rarely the case. But it says 100%. Out of 654 Thai foreign workers, all of them said they had been exposed to sexual assault. What do you think that shows you about what this society is allowing, as long as you're not in their society? Now, I'm talking about Zionists. Looks like Gilligan right there. Realize that there are Orthodox Jews in this country that speak out against all of this stuff, or in other countries. My point is simply to show you that they get beat up in Israel. It's about Zionists and the Zionist mentality of what they're willing to allow as long as you are outside of their selected group. That is racism. That is supremacism. That is a problem. This thing's refreshed twice since we've had it up. Like they're always changing stuff on these. But the point is that this shows you what they're allowing. Like 100% means that they're raping or assaulting sexually every worker, every one of them, because they know they can get away with it, because they don't think these people are the same. Ask Ethiopian Jews how they're treated. They'll tell you as second-class citizens. It's about Zionism, and they're racist. Here is one from 2024, August 5th. By legitimizing rape, I keep doing that. Israeli society takes one step further towards moral decay. For the podcast, that's Haaretz, the leading Israeli newspaper, writing about how Israelis are legitimizing rape and stepping towards moral decay. Yeah, we all see that. This actually one of the examples we're going to come to. This guy, this is the guy who was raped. The one we all talked about. Next one, Haaretz as well. This one from September 11th. Israel's rife with rape apologists, and they're getting louder. Haaretz. Israeli media writing about Israeli society, and yet we get called racist for pointing out what they're saying. The Squirrel point this out. It's a thread. You can read it for yourself. It goes on about a lot of things, and I'll actually play that clip we played in the past as well because it works perfectly right here. He says a Palestinian civilian raped by female Israeli guards has been direct testimony that children are... Oh, actually, I take it back. I saw this and brought it in line. I thought he was referencing the guy, this guy right here, this story. If you want to have trouble sleeping tonight, read this report. Literally called Welcome to Hell by B'Tselem. I'll actually include that report so you don't miss it. B'Tselem, the one of the leading human rights groups in the world, and it is an Israeli human rights group, called Welcome to Hell, the Israeli prison system as a network of torture camps, rape being a primary discussion in this article. Because this came after what happened. This is crazy to me that we pretend. We're done with the BS, guys. We're done pretending like people trying to tell you you're wrong, who don't want to look at it, are even worth considering anymore. This is a guy who was raped, who is telling you that children are also being raped in their dungeons or their prisons. Mass raped is what he says. He says genital mutilation and torture is routine, which, by the way, is a whole section about that in this report. He says, and Israeli doctors are joining in on the torture. Now, this is coming from his statements. Clearly, he has every reason in the world to make, to go after them because he was raped. So, I mean, he could be embellishing for all we know. But the point is, we know this is happening. And he goes on to show you many examples. Here is a member of the State Department who resigned because he tried to expose the rape of a child. And what did Israel do? They shut down the location and accused them of being terrorists. Let that reflect on what they call terrorists today.
We have to condemn the atrocities that happen every day to Palestinians in the West Bank. You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel. And a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen.
Exactly. I was going to grab this real quick since somebody in the chat just really mentioned it. Oh, it's open secret. Because the truth is, this stuff is an open secret. Like that's the whole point of this whole segment. It's embarrassingly obvious. The evidence goes back decades, and yet we pretend like we're not sure. It was about the idea of organ trafficking, which again, it's a worldwide dynamic, and then that specifically just Israelis, but the reality being of the Israeli government being explicitly involved. Just as October 7th has been proven at least 3 times now by human rights groups, guys, catching them doing it with bodies they steal. It's crazy. The open secret of Palestinian organ theft. But continuing this segment, here's one we discussed. This is one of the shows from July of this year. which the segment being Israeli soldiers arrested for gang rape protected by leadership, which we've already seen. That was the welcome to hell discussion. This one from Robert from March 29th. Israel's October 7th rape propaganda has encouraged sexual violence against Palestinian women. 100%. It's been backed up by human rights groups. Now, here's Elon Levy again. Same tweet. The Hamas rapist regime. How does that feel now? And on top of that, if you actually pay attention, the reality of everything they've pointed to, as the squirrel's broken down, the New York Times, as he calls it, the rape apologist hoax, I think, it's imploded. They've been admitted that was false. They got caught. Or the Zaka information that's been proven by Haaretz. Or the UN Pramila Patton conversation, where she herself, actually, I think I can grab that, has spoken about this and said it was not. I think it's right here. Yeah, the UN representative Pramila Patton, who prepared the report on alleged sexual violence on October 7th, in this clip, despite them misrepresenting it, admits that the report is not an investigation and that it contains unfounded and outright false testimonies from Israeli entities. Now, she says it's not an investigation. We were not even trying to allot blame. We were collecting data points and organizing that for later. We were not deciding who was guilty. We were not. And in fact, she said we found many examples of them lying about stuff. And even this woman, I think was referencing the New York Times and saying that exactly what it was, a false narrative. And yet here he is, just going along with the rapist regime narrative, while Israeli government and military are being exposed by their own human rights groups for raping people in prison. God only knows what's happening in Gaza. But let's go to the other part of this embarrassingly childish liar. Holding a British citizen hostage. Okay. Interesting how you only care about the Israeli hostage, British Israeli entity who's being held by everyone's accounts without being harmed, being fed, being brought shopping, being allowed to play game. But meanwhile, you're starving to death, raping and torturing people in your prisons. Just to make sure we understand the difference. Well, this one's what I just brought up. What about the British workers that were killed by your airstrikes? Oh, I see why you don't want to bring those up, Elon. I get it. You're disgusting. Okay, how about just to point out on top of that the families of one of the WCK workers is now, this is September. That's last month. Well after the fact, they're calling for an independent investigation. You know why? Because despite what Matt Miller screeches about, they have never followed up. They have never actually investigated. They just, the day later, they said, we're done. We didn't do it. Well, it was an accident. And Matt Miller continues to pretend like we're going to follow up in its investigation. No, their own families are going, screw that. You guys are doing nothing. We demand an investigation, which probably will never happen. But Elon Levy wants to know why you haven't released this. What about these people, guy? What about the people that you just murdered? What about Manchester student says 15 relatives of hers have died in Gaza? We don't care about those British people? Obviously, we know what's going on here, guys. They're hypocrites. They're desperately deflecting to anything they can to outrage people they might just catch at a moment where they don't know what else is going on. If you look barely into this conversation, even at corporate media information, you will see they're lying to you. Like I said, the first week of this, they have lost. They have already lost the information war. It's over. So all this is about right now is trying to manage some next step that doesn't completely destroy what they are and what they want have going for them. And I'm talking about Zionism. We need to actually dismantle this thing as opposed to let it creep forward and reestablish itself. Now, this is going to get into the conversation of atrocities in general. And I think we talked about this over like Bosnia, Rwanda, or almost any genocide you can think of, you can prove. And I don't mean this by hyperbolic statements like Elon Levy. I mean prove by their own statements, by UN documents, that Israel's government was involved. I too thought that. I was like, that's pretty crazy. Guess what? It's real. And I talked about this with Rwanda when I did my own deep dive, and I was blown away by how obvious this was. We're done with the BS.
Oh, we're on a military base or something. Okay, that's an Israeli rifle, so we have to be here in Israel. What? Why are there Israeli weapons in the middle of South Sudan? Despite UN sanctions on arms sales, Israel continuously sold advanced weapons to South Sudan during its brutal civil war that claimed over 400,000 lives, 10% of whom were children. Israeli arms like the Ace assault rifle have been documented in the hands of various factions throughout the country. These weapons have been linked to serious human rights violations, including attacks on civilians and ethnic massacres. After South Sudan gained independence in 2011, Israel quickly established diplomatic relations by recognizing it as an independent state. According to Mossad chief Zavi Zamir, Israel wanted to prevent Sudanese military units from integrating with Egyptian forces on the border of Israel by keeping Sudan's army occupied. Additionally, they wanted to strengthen operative ties with Kenya and Ethiopia and extend aid to a nation fighting for its independence and liberation from Islamic tyranny. However, the continued supply of arms during an active conflict has only accelerated the devastation experienced by millions of families, leading to countless condemnations by local and international humanitarian organizations.
Right. Damn it. Missed it. As well as child soldiers and illegal mining. You know, the same old from all these people. I mean, realize it's the obvious nature of this. Oh, and by the way, this is the guy who was doing this, Eric Hovigim. I'm not familiar, but I just followed him because I like that video. We'll see what else comes out of it. It's funny, I say that I do that often where I don't like investigate. If I see somebody that gets something I like or I'm interested or I like their view take, I usually just follow and then wait to see more of it and then unfollow if I think, it's usually just a rapid thing. But I think that's a good practice because you can always dig through someone's feed and be like, "Ooh, I don't like that," or "Ooh, he's this side," and it's just about information, and it's important to think about people. Can get through sometimes. And either way, the point is, here he is. If you want to follow him, he's talking about the Sudan. Now, I was referencing a lot of things, Bosnia, Rwanda, which I'll talk about briefly next. But what's important to highlight here is that this could just be about profiteering. But I think it's much more than that. I think it's about seeding the narrative as well as the destabilization that benefits your agenda. Now, what they say there, the framing it as fighting the Islamic terrorists, that's always how this works. It's not the accuracy, it's not the reality of what's going on. And remember, you drive them into this position and then go, yeah, as long as you just normalize with Israel, that's all, then who cares, right? So what, you want to tell us that you're trying to fight Islamic terror, but if the government normalizes with you, we'll just stop caring about that? The point is, either there was never any issue, like I say every time, or they're okay with terrorism as long as you normalize with Israel. There's only two ways to look at that. And either way shows you we're dealing with a dishonest, genocidal maniac. Now, the point is that if you want to go through this episode, it will blow your mind because this is not my opinion. This is not coming from anything other than solid source material. Whether we're talking about documented evidence from the actual event or people that were covering this after the fact as reporters or the UN conversation or human rights groups or Israeli entities bragging about it, giving them Uzis and weapons, or the on-the-record conversation of Israeli entities trying to convince one of the elements of the Rwanda genocide to ultimately lean into the idea that the other side was their problem. And saying, well, just like our problem with the Palestinians, we understand where you're coming from. We got to help each other get rid of them. Like that kind of stuff, driving this, arming from before, during, and after the ongoing, the Rwanda genocide. Look up Bosnia. Look up any number of these things. You will find them at least profiting from the terror. You cannot ignore this stuff anymore. Now, here is a Burmese genocide scholar telling you the reality of Israel.
It's not just single acts, but if you have to look at them, look different policies and practices of Israel as being interconnected with the singular purpose of taking the land without people. It has everything, all the elements of historical crimes that we witness in settler colonial genocides across North America, Latin America, Australia, right? South, and Africa. Everything is there, man. Israel is the embodiment of all elements of crimes, with the exception of slave trade and slavery. Yeah.
Yeah, except we could make a case for that too, but we'll leave that for another show.
That we have witnessed the Christian Europe committed over the last 500 years against the people of color around the world. Israel is the worst form of, genocidal regime. That's why, Professor Noam Chomsky, who used to live here in his youth in the 1950s in kibbutz, right? He finally said Israel is the most vicious type of settler colonialism. Everything that is wrong with the human civilization, Israel has mastered and institutionalized it.
Tell us about the actual interactions that you had with Palestinians and Israelis So you spent time in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Were you able to meet with Palestinians? And if so, what was their feelings and attitudes towards the situation that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I had like, talked to different Palestinians from a cross section of the Palestinian society, right? Like kids in refugee camps, the shop owners, university students, NGO activists, faith leaders, from Lutheran Church, like other Christian denominations, and also I also talked to we visited El Aqsa Mosque, and talk to the prayers there. In West Bank, what strikes me is that although West Bank is nominally under the Palestinian Authority administration, the common view is that Palestinian authorities are at best completely impotent, to protect the Palestinian population. They're at best, and at worst, Palestinian authorities is really, serving as a local controller of Palestinian people, their own people, for Israel. I don't make these words up. That's like, when you sit down and, chat with them, the locals say Palestinian authorities controlling us for Israel. That's rather damning. And then, and someone like even said, oh, we're under double occupation. I mean, that I was shocked, and what we're looking at is like, basically like a Nazi Germany-like situation, right? Because like people, the Western media and, all the politicians and, even the Israeli people, they're blaming everything on Netanyahu. But Netanyahu is, riding the beast of a thoroughly Zionist society. The way Israeli talked about.
I actually do think that term is much better. Zionized, because it implies that something's been done to you, as opposed to just people that have adopted a belief structure. I really believe that. I mean, I think this is an aggressive kind of mental, it's a cult, guys. I mean, we need to recognize that the people aren't born with genocidal intent or dehumanizing perspectives. These are just like the U.S. government does the same thing. But I just want to make sure, I think that's an important distinction, whether just being a Zionist entity or a Zionized entity. I'm gonna use that.
Palestinian. I struck up conversations with fellow passengers in Tel Aviv on a tram or buses, and they would say, Palestinian people, they're miserable people, they're in deep poverty, they're not the problem, but it's their leaders. And then it turned out that that's the standard narrative that Israel has circulated, right? Like, okay, that don't say anything racist about the Palestinians, just focus on the organizations and politicians, right? But they don't talk about 810-kilometer long wall that has massively impoverished and dispossessed and also settlements, right? Like the displacement, the use of terror, right? None of this is, insofar as the Israelis' public opinion is concerned, from my reading, my limited interactions, Israeli public feels they are moral. And one woman used the term moral code. Well, Netanyahu had broken the moral code. I was like, well, what kind of moral code Netanyahu broke? I was like, well, he needed to save the, hostages, rescue them. Or like, we don't leave in our Jewish or Israeli Jewish society, we don't leave our people in distress or in need or at risk alone. We have to do it. But their sense of moral obligation does not extend to any Palestinian that they have terrorized for the last 75 years.
Now I'm going to leave it there. There's about 5 more minutes left. It's a great clip. But what's important to hear there is the point many of us are trying to honestly make, as much as it's very uncomfortable. And again, that's why I make that point. I think this has been done to these people, but it's not to give any kind of a pass. There's accountability here. These are individual choices. But my point is that, like he's saying, that, there's a line to be shown there where, yes, there is an alignment of us all going, yes, this needs to stop. Yes, there needs to be a ceasefire and take whatever deal Hamas offers. But clearly their line that's crossed is the fact that they have left their own people to die, which I think all of us would be outraged about. If any of you, like I'm showing right now about how your government's not caring about Israel's killing Americans, or how Mr. Elon Levy, who is British, it's funny how the way that they frame this whole situation, but you don't care about them killing British people. Why is that? Right? It's just so much gross hypocrisy. But what he's saying there is that they are outraged about it insofar as that it's their people being hurt, but they don't seem to care about Palestinians. Not all. There's a large group of people in this country that do, but it's a minority for sure. So going forward on this segment, Mohammed Shihada made a great point about somebody. I briefly pointed this out, but this is Avichai Baron, who ran an article calling to build, quote, extermination camps for, quote, Amalek. Netanyahu made this guy a Likud minister, or Likud Knesset member. This is 12 years before October 7th, he says this. 12 years before October 7th. So keep telling me it's all because of that day. Extermination camps for Amalek, the same term he then uses to call Palestinians Amalek after October 7th. It's just so obvious. Israel's genocide in Gaza is one of the most premeditated, well-documented in modern history. There's his article. Done pretending, guys. Now, you might have seen this. Julian Assange spoke up. Yeah, he's been quiet since he got released, but he finally spoke up, and guess what? It's about Gaza. It's about Israel. I think there's a reason for that. He mentions the idea of the assassinations, but he importantly ties it to what I think is one of the most important building blocks of where this goes. Not the immediacy of the genocide, which I think is worldwide the most important thing, but then just because it's human life and because from an American perspective, they're using our money, our tax dollars, the weapons that you are responsible, Americans, whether you like it or not. Your government has made you responsible, so you have to care about that. Now, in the sense, well, as always, you can choose to not care about anything. But to be objective about what we're discussing, it should be important to everybody, is how you should frame that. But my point is that he connects it with the idea of where it's going, the idea of the artificial intelligence being used to assassinate people in real time, basically live streamed. That's pretty terrifying. They are normalizing this.
From prison, I see that artificial intelligence is being used to create mass assassinations, where before there was
otherwise known as genocide in Gaza.
The difference between assassination and warfare. Now the two are conjoined, where many, perhaps the majority of targets in Gaza are bombed as a result of artificial intelligence targeting. The connection between artificial intelligence and surveillance is important. Artificial intelligence needs information to come up with targets or ideas or propaganda. When we're talking about the use of artificial intelligence to conduct mass assassinations, surveillance data from telephones, internet, is key to training those algorithms.
They're using you is the point, guys. Just like Israel's always, right? What's that? There's been documentaries made about this. Battle tested. Literally, Israel, not even secret, will use experimental as well as just new weapons in Gaza and then sell them at conventions as battle tested. That's how grotesque this all is. And right now they're using this to basically train. I mean, you could make a valid argument that the only reason this is happening is to, from an Israeli perspective, why they might have engineered this or from a globalist perspective, to officially fine-tune what's coming next. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot more going on, but that's a very alarming thing to see because that is happening. As he's telling you, but just because I think it's easy to prove. They are working out the bugs, or rather just testing officially the AI assassination program. And as it says here in the tweet, the US, UK, EU armed Israel has made the concept of an AI dystopia into a reality where human life is destroyed on a genocidal scale using AI. And even as they report these in 7972 magazine, a mass assassination factory inside Israel's calculated bombing of Gaza. They make it clear they're just bombing buildings to take down buildings. These are IDF sources. Or the fact that they are being told to just follow along with what the AI tells them to do, that they're being driven by a time-sensitive concept So they're not even able to check the AI. So the point becomes, it's not our fault. AI told us to. We're being told we're supposed to listen to it. There's a reason that's happening, guys. Here's another example. They've written many of these. Now, this one's called Lavender, the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. One was about building structures. One was specifically about individuals. And they are using these to assassinate people on a large scale. Let's not forget, I think there's at least 4 or 5 IDF whistleblowers since October 7th who have spoke up and told you what they're doing. This is why we're saying we're done pretending, okay? They are there. The evidence, the evidence we have around any one of these would be enough in any court to put somebody in prison.
Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed. What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
There are many, many examples of that. Now, if you watch the full, that was just the opening clip I broke off. The actual interview is horrifying. Exactly what we're talking about. He's going, yes, I saw that. Yes, they did that. I was there. This is going to haunt me forever. Now, here is Jewish Voice for Peace saying a growing number of Americans, now this, shifting into another segment generally about the idea of the food or starvation, which again is obvious. Except now they've shifted into it's a hoax, which they've just kind of left there recently. Even one of the women from one of the spokesmen that tried to tell me that I was lying about it, I proved that she was wrong, and then she blocked me, which I'm pretty sure is a violation of Twitter terms of service, but who cares because they won't enforce it against an Israeli entity. It says, a growing number of Americans are calling on U.S. Secretary of State Blinken to be impeached for lying to Congress and denying that the Israeli government, as we now provably know, and did before this anyway, is deliberately blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Now, in case you missed the ProPublica article, I'll grab that for you. And it's not just that either. I mean, this is just one of many mainstream investigations. And the point is, in this case, this is 2 different government bodies concluding that they lied. That they knew and they lied. And then it went even further where apparently Blinken was approving their striking of aid convoys as long as they thought Hamas might be able to use it. All this has come out. This guy should be in prison. They all should be. It says last week, ProPublica revealed that the U.S. governmental agencies had confirmed that Israel's deliberate starvation of Palestinians was happening, which meant that under U.S. law, the U.S. was required to suspend its weapon shipments. They knew that. They didn't care. They lied to you about it. But in May, Blinken's office denied that. Now, there's a thread that you can read. My point is, just as I thought, the scapegoat. Remember, I just said this. He certainly deserves all that's coming his way, but he is just a front man, guys. Think about it. He's the one that keeps getting shoved out to make these statements that we all know are lies, that you can prove in real time as he's saying them, or even the opposite of what Netanyahu is saying. And yet he still says it. He is a useful idiot in this conversation. And the point is, they're calling for him to be impeached. Whether it happens or not is up in the air, but it's obviously justifiable. He's caught lying. But the reality is it wasn't Blinken. It was the administration. It was our whole of government, left or right. Justified. They know what they're doing. Include this ProPublica article, worth reading. It's an important article. Now, here was the drop site article we've also mentioned. Blinken approved policy to bomb aid trucks. It's not just their, what is this? This is Substack, right? Oh, no, it's I forget. Anyway, yeah, you could personalize it. I'm pretty sure it's a Substack, right? Yeah, Substack. It's not just their Substack. They're citing documents that you can prove. And these are investigations. And the point is, it's all very clear. It's all right on the surface. People are just pretending it's not there because they have an interest. Here is the Libertarian Institute. White House ignored warnings from Pentagon. State Department that Israel was creating a catastrophe. See how these are all different stories, but aiming in the same direction. This is from October 7th, yesterday. Recently released emails, which you can read for yourself, from Reuters show that officials in the White House ignored warnings from their counterparts at the Department of State, at the Defense and State Department, warning that Israel was committing war crimes and creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. How many more things do we need? I mean, what this needs to show you is that there's nothing that can hold them accountable. because we live in a broken system that we need to fight to fix, because everything shows you what they're doing. They just kind of wait. Okay, nothing's happening. There's no pitchforks and torches here. Okay, so let's keep going. Let that resonate with you right now. That's what's happening. I'm not calling for violence, but you damn well better do something. Whether it's a show like this, protesting, petitioning, whatever you think may happen, do something. Because I'll tell you right now, I think what we're doing right here is making a difference. But what we need is more. And more than just, which I do outside of this, more physical, we're real world action. But we need to do something, because when we don't, they take that as a sign to keep going. Now, here is just one of the horrifying examples that are happening every single day. We already talked about this. This is, even admitted by Israel. These are cans designed to look like food that are actually bombs. Now, I think it's just, I've countless examples. I've seen at least 3 of these, I think, off the top of my head, of children deliberately. Like, I think these are even aimed at children. There was one example that was left around toys or a backpack, and it says 3 hungry children are seriously injured in Khan Yunis, the safe zone, after picking up an Israeli trick incendiary disguised as a can of food. Sorry, you even have to look at this. What you have to understand is this is deliberate. This is a choice designed to do this. There's no way you make that you can't make that anything else. Dan Cohen also points out, like we've shown you countless times, whether it's Elon Levy and the rest of them, or in Barsky just lying about bread factories that are working, even though we can prove they bombed them in October, right? The same month this started. And then weeks later, they're claiming there's a bread factory pumping out more bread than ever, or him saying it's a hoax, that there's even people starving, even though we can prove by every account that people are literally dying, catastrophic food insecurity, according to the IPC. Here's another example of this. Zionist, this is from Dan Cohen, who we just had a great interview with. Zionist Israel's final solution for northern Gaza is being implemented right now. We're going to touch on that at the end about northern Gaza. This is the most heinous crime in human history for the simple fact that we are watching it happen in real time. On top, what I keep saying, that not only are they doing it, they're telling you it's the righteous thing to do. That's the right thing to do. It kills me. But it says, and the Western powers are actively supporting it. This, what you're staring at, is the only flour warehouse in Jabalia camp. It only had a few sacks for hundreds of thousands of people. This means as they surround Jabalia camp with tanks, Palestinians will die of hunger if they survive the bombs. This is deliberate. There's no way around it. This wasn't a bombing. They burned these. They set it on fire. This is what they keep doing. Here's the IPC, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, like the group to look at for the conversation of whether or not a group is in famine or starving. Famine is imminent in 1.1 million people. Half of Gaza experience catastrophic food insecurity. This isn't new either. I've looked at the date on here, but this was, right here. This is as of May 2024. Excuse me. Something caught in my throat. Which is why, by the way, I'm including this yet again. We haven't seen this in a minute. I haven't shown it in a minute. This is from the OCHA. This is the breakdown of how many trucks they're sending through. As we've been pulled away to Lebanon, a lot of people anyway, I keep telling you this, guys. It is literally declining. So if you remember that before October 7th, 500 trucks a day were coming in, including fuel, that at that point, they were already dangerously food insecure. So point being, 500 a day was already not enough at that time. Then they kickstarted the genocide by deliberately bringing it down to 9 a day, which only guaranteed people would starve. And then never, not for one moment, did they ever get past, at most, 165 a day. A fraction of what's needed to maintain even the food insecurity. And they lied about it. Elon Levy lies about it. We've never sent more food in our lives. Just bombastic. Then it's now, since June, July, August, September, down to 52 a day. All of August, it was 65 trucks a day. People are literally starving in real time. And by the way, they now have more crossings open than they did before. And now they're bringing it down. There's a deliberate action happening here, guys. So that's the point. We know they're starving. In May, half of them were in danger of famine. It's already there, by all accounts. Now, here's Assault Rod pointing out what Saeed Erekat was trying to confront Matt Miller about. And this is about the amount of money that they've dumped in the hands of people knowing everything we just showed you, despite the fact that we know it's a crime based on everything we just showed you. And we have the evidence showing you that Blinken and the rest of them have now been caught knowing that that's the case. And yet he still defends sending money to Israel. It's a crime. There is literally nothing about this. This is legitimate in any possible way. And yet he still, because what else are they going to do? You're caught. All right. In one side of his mind, he sees a jail cell. On the other side, he sees lies for Israel. What do you think he chooses? That's if he even cares. The point is the way he responds, the righteous indignation, and of course the funny part. And whenever Matt Lee speaks up, Matt Miller cowers like a little child, which is hilarious. Which who knows why? I mean, Matt Lee does have a lot of standing in this room. But what's funny to me is that whatever it is, everyone else he'll cut off, but Matt Lee will speak right over him. And the face that he makes, my one moment of enjoyment during all this horrible stuff, to watch Matt Miller cower like a little. You'll see. But my point is that they're sending this much money all the way up to now and then defending, continuing it, as we can prove they're raping people in prison or elsewhere, as they're murdering children, deliberately, gleefully laughing about it, as they are starving people to death, as they are harvesting organs, as they are committing a genocide, moving into Lebanon. Here he is defending all of it.
Them on taxpayers paid for almost $23 billion in the last year alone. That's almost $3,000 for each and every Israelis. So you have absolutely no leverage on, no pressure. You cannot tell them do this or not do this.
So we make very clear to the government of Israel what we believe that are the best outcomes along a number of different vectors in the region. But as you've heard me say before, they're ultimately a sovereign country and have to make their own.
Except you're breaking the law, and they're breaking the law, and you damn well know that. But just like they know that around the Azov movement, they don't care. They knew they were breaking the law, and they just funded them anyway. It's the same thing. What frustrates me is that none of them point that out. Like right there is the best opportunity to be like, but we all know based on your own government statements that they blocked aid, which means it's illegal to fund them with arms. You know that. But he would just deflect, but it would still be on the record. But they don't do that. But that's the point, though. It is illegal because of that. He doesn't care.
Decisions.
Yes, but I understand. But a sovereign country that received from American taxpayers that received $22 billion.
So first of all, that number is not correct.
It's more, and I can prove it to you. But he's trying to downplay it like it's less based on confusing factors, which Matt Lee tears him apart for, because he damn well knows that it's easy to find the reality. Guys, I'm telling you, it's very easy to prove. I just went over the information recently, just even over the last packages. In the last so many months, it's like 50 billion. And not on top of almost $4 billion a year. But regardless, it's far too much money.
It conflates a number of different things. But it's not. It's not correct. It's off.
Okay,
it conflates.
half of that.
So
what is the number?
I don't have the exact number, but if you look at the, I know the number you're referring to.
This is the number that came out of.
Yeah, which it can.
there was 17.
So what's the U.S. government? What does the U.S. government think that it has given Israel since October 7th?
So I don't know. We give them $3.3 billion a year, and there was additional money that was appropriated in the supplemental. The reason it's hard to ask answer that question definitively is
that
they're
you
different.
Don't want to.
That's why. No.
Yeah. See, Matt called because you don't want to answer it. Yes.
That's why it's hard to
there
answer.
are different ways of looking at it. There's money that is appropriated, there's money that's allocated, and then not actually delivered for years to come.
Educational organizations that have come up with.
Right there. I love it. Meek coward. For whatever reason, he bows to Matt Lee. I love it. And everyone else, he will just run over the top. He tried, but Matt also knows he's got standing there, and you can see it in the demeanor. Matt has the upper hand over Matt Miller. Matt Lee has the upper hand over Matt Miller, and I love it. Call it a petty point all you want. I think Matt Miller's a horrible person, and I enjoy watching him be put in his place.
Estimates that have come up with estimates. This building, at least, which is in charge of arms transfers, at least many of them, hasn't seen fit to come up with an update since July of last year.
Which is how they usually do this, right? They just, we didn't get to it. No, you deliberately held it off. There's a reason we claimed that, I think it was like 10,000 people have been killed in Yemen for like 11 years straight because they just stopped telling you what they were killed. The numbers were exponentially higher than that because they were dying of famine, but they just kind of held it at the old number. And I could have the number wrong. The point is when it eventually was looked into, it was shockingly higher, but they just kept repeating that number because they simply never updated the amount that was coming in. It's the same thing. They do it on purpose. I'm glad to see people saying, you know what, we're done with your BS.
Yeah, I just don't have the update. I'm just telling you that number. You can look at that number and see how it conflates a number of things, including direct U.S. military spending to combat the Houthis attacking international shipping, which is included in that number,
But
which is
it
obviously
can't
not
be
aid to
that
Israel.
difficult to
No, it's not. Before he goes past that, that's not the case, because the reality is the Houthis have not killed anybody. Nobody. Just like Iran shooting and not killing anybody, because the point is they're deliberately trying to demonstrate the difference between the belligerents of the U.S. and Israel, whether or not they're a good entity. They see a strategic benefit in doing so, and they have. And all they're doing is stopping the shipments that are only, nobody else, they've proven this, going to help Israel. And they said, once you'll stop your genocide, we'll stop this game. And they know that. So yes, it's for Israel. And yes, it's for your agenda at the expense of everybody. But what Matt goes on to say is that, look, just stop BSing us. You know, you could just split this apart. It's obvious to see the difference. And again, the way he looks is funny because he cowers.
Combat the Houthis attacking international shipping, which is included in that number, which is obviously not aid to
that
Israel.
difficult to separate what has been given to them post October 7th in terms of things that were not approved before then under the MOU, stuff that went to them specifically for the Gaza operate and now Lebanon.
So it depends how you look at it. Is it the amount that's been allocated to them? Is it the amount that's been delivered to them? Is it an amount that is going to be delivered?
I'll take any of them.
No,
right
I know
now.
that's the point.
Yeah. Give me all three, Matt. Go. I mean, does he really think that sounds complicated? Those are basic three categories that would take 30 seconds to break down. This is the best they have, you understand? They don't want you to know. Why do you think that is?
Is when you ask the question, it's a difficult one. I don't have the numbers here at my fingertips, obviously. I'm just pointing out that the number that's
Super complicated. Three categories. Woo, man, it would take us all year.
Someplace, Matt, the numbers were Brown University's numbers, not mine, and so on. But it doesn't matter what the actual figure is. But we give them a lot of money. We give them a great deal of leverage. We give them obviously a great deal of political coverage in the UN and many other places and so on. And to suggest that this huge and lengthy partnership really does not exact any kind of leverage with the Israelis. Don't you question that?
That's not what I said. The thing that I said is that
he didn't put any words in your mouth. He asked a basic question. But the point, see, Matt senses that you're getting at something and he's defending against what he thinks you're getting at. That's what a dishonest person does. He asked a basic question. You're giving them billions of dollars and nothing you say makes a difference. Doesn't that seem a problem to you? That's the real question, which he'll never answer. And even if he gets pushed to it, he'll argue like, they're a sovereign country. They can do what they want. Well, we're back to the point where what you're doing is illegal. So you're wrong.
we are a sovereign country with our interests. They're a sovereign country with their interests.
There it is.
We have very direct conversations with them about what we think the appropriate path forward is. But ultimately, like every sovereign country, they have to make their own decisions. They have to bear the consequences for those decisions.
Right. You want to commit genocide? That's on you. You go ahead and do that. But see, the point is there's consequences, except there's not, though. Right. So we come full around the circle. The point is that if you don't have consequences, then that's where that story ends. So you go, we need you to do this, and we're tough about it. And then they go, well, we don't care. And then you do nothing about that. And guess what they learn? They're not going to do anything. So you can go ahead and speak about all you want to. We demand this, and we're going to raise the issue. And and I doubt that's even happening. But even if it is, if you're not doing anything, there are no consequences, then they won't care. It's just blatant. That's why this is so hard for people, and even some of them in the room. We all know he's lying. We all know that. Everybody. It's very easy to see. Here's anti-war. Support for Israel has cost U.S. taxpayers at least, I'm glad they said that, $22.76 billion in 1 year. It's more than that. Just like our foreign, our military spending is exponentially more. That's the wrong word. A lot more than 1 trillion. What was it? It was way. I've pulling off the top of my head. The number that they're discussing, it's shockingly more than that because of all the black operations that, the black ops, the things that we don't see, or the money that they allot for things technically not military, even though they very clearly get used for military. It's all a game. It's how they work it's how they play the job numbers. They're always lying to you. Now, on the point of, so over here, we're talking about starving children, right? The starvation tactics or the bombing of hospitals. Here is the point about targeting health workers, ambulance drivers, teachers, aid workers, targeting them. Now, I've shared this many times, and I keep planning on adding more. I just haven't got a chance to yet. This is a thread from August 22nd with so far, I mean, I'm going to add, I think I have at least 4 or 5 more that I need to add. These are doctors speaking up, telling you that they're targeting children, that they're murdering people, that they're assassinating doctors who they've taken, whether they are as Palestinian or not. Every single one of them, without question, not mincing words. They're murdering innocent people right in front of us. And yet we're like, well, we don't know for sure. It's horrifying to me. And every single time I post this one video, every single time they put a warning on it, which immediately stops the threat, the reach in its tracks. Now, weirdly, I see people post it and it doesn't get this warning. I guess it's just a coincidence. Now, here's what's interesting. I posted this under a bunch of people's videos. One of those September 23rd, but you'll see many, many, many in a row. All of a sudden, right? For whatever reason, somebody called notice to it, and Twitter in the these are all the same day this came through. I got 2 different notifications like this where they're going, we flagged these as inappropriate. Every single one that you're looking at here. And there's more than just this or this video. Here's one example. Posting the video, and this guy's saying, United States stands with Israel. That's when I was saying it, like that day when it was everywhere. And I said, no, bought off politicians pretending to represent the United States stand with Israel. The rest of the world sees you and sees this. Flagged. Because it starts going somewhere, even as a share from underneath. And they stop it with the sensitive tag. Why is it sensitive? It's not, it's just words. There's plenty of actual graphic stuff going on. There are people saying, murder their families in Palestine. No one cares. But when Ryan shares a video that has a lot of impact, Twitter immediately suppresses it. I think you know why. Because this video is incredible. And I'm playing, even though you guys have probably seen it 5 times, I think it's powerful.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple of weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday Morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head.
Done with the BS.
Some shootings have been captured on video.
So, of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
Combined. And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
My God.
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before.
It blows my mind every time I listen to this.
Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds.
The UN reports that to date, more than 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced, and the majority of its buildings destroyed. A reality which has taken its own toll on the well-being of children.
Now, here is the long thread. Every single one of these is giving you something in that effect. This is the one from Al-Shifa Hospital telling you that he has witnessed them assassinating doctors. And that not a single doctor in anyone has talked to in all of this has ever seen a Hamas member in these hospitals with them. Of course, he could be wrong. He could be missing it. But how much do we need? And of course, that's why they put a warning on it, in my opinion anyway, because it gets reach. It affects people. It informs them about what's really going on. Almost exclusively children. Everything he's ever done combined, he saw more in the first week in Gaza. There's just no ignoring stuff like this. This is why people like Liam are outraged. I'm just done with them pretending like what you're saying is even legitimately worthy of anything but ridicule. Here is Mads Gilbert, one of the people that have been talking about this a lot, and he's one of the people in that thread. Israel has now killed 1,000 healthcare workers in Palestine and Lebanon, because it's happening in Lebanon now too, with total impunity. He says, what would the world have said if 1,000 Israeli Jewish healthcare workers had been killed by a military force attacking their country? It doesn't matter what the justification or logic would be. You damn well know. It's the same way the U.S. government calls people who defend against their illegal invasions terrorists. That's how this game is played, even though they're just defending an illegal occupation or invasion. Soleimani is where they get the term from, why they claim he killed Americans. He defended against a U.S. government's invasion of an illegal occupation. We now know for a fact. This is the way they play this game. That's why, as Caitlin recently said, John Stone, you should know by now, the terrorist designation is ridiculous. It's arbitrary. It simply means unruly populations that we need to bomb. Here's what Mads Gilbert had to say.
The last UN numbers from OCHA, summing up 850 killed healthcare workers in Gaza since the 7th of October. If we add the 100 plus killed in Lebanon, we have probably passed 1,000 healthcare workers killed by the Israeli occupation forces in occupied Palestine and in Lebanon. What would the world have said if 1,000 Israeli, Jewish healthcare workers, medical students, nurses had been killed by some military force attacking their country? We know the answer, and we can't stand it.
See that for the podcast. WHO, 28 healthcare workers killed in Lebanon in 24 hours. So this is the point. Like I said earlier, this is not Gaza. Okay, these clumsy claims about tunnels and human shields, there's no justifiable reason to take at face value that they have some indication that that even exists. On top of that, 28 in 24 hours. So what are we tying doctors to their legs? Is there any evidence whatsoever to make this case? No, nobody is buying this. There's only people who are invested and people who are going along. I mean, people who are invested in the narrative for any number of reasons, and then people that are simply Zionists. That's how I look at this. Of course, it's never all absolute. There's going to be people that are not paying attention, people that are, because they're not paying attention, just believe the narrative. My point, though, is that we see the categories. If you are even halfway paying attention, you know what's happening, unless you're politically invested or simply a Zionist. Here is Will Christo pointing out a Guardian article. Lebanese healthcare workers fearful as growing numbers killed in strikes. October 3rd. Paramedics say there's a pattern. Weird how it seems to be the exact same pattern they've used in Yemen, they've used in Syria, and they've used in every other war Israel and the U.S. have been involved in. When they arrive to save the wounded, Israel strikes begin. Or like Saudi Arabia. Well, I guess that's Yemen, same point, but this is what we've seen everywhere. It's constant, guys. In fact, what they usually do is bomb something and then wait for people to come save them, and then the real bomb comes in. Straight up terrorism. And by the way, an obvious war crime. Rescuers started getting calls ordering them to evacuate their headquarters. Again, I don't understand how anybody hasn't. That's crazy to me. Now, not just calls, mind you. They're getting like messages sent to their phones. They're infiltrating their tech. On top of that, why do they think they have the right to order people like a Lebanese government building that has nothing to do with Hezbollah to evacuate? Because it's not about anything but bombing Lebanon, just like they are with Gaza. It's Palestinians. They're killing Lebanese people. Fears grow among Lebanese medical workers as Israel kills 50 of them in 2 weeks. 50. 28 in 1 day. So, to go on to Lebanon in general, this was from October 6th, 2 days ago. Guarantee the numbers have gone up a lot since then. Howard Beckett simply says this is happening in Lebanon. So imagine, acknowledge the fact that we have simply shifted over to Lebanon without even a break. That's what I was saying before, that they just cobble together the same clumsy narrative, the same exact statements, and it's all happening again. Human shield, every home, every tunnel, every single group, and just mass carpet bombing Beirut or individual locations or using it's exactly the same things we've seen. And if you can acknowledge that what they did in Gaza, even if they were telling the truth as a crime, how do we even pretend that this is even remotely on path with something in line with international law? We all know it's not. They are committing genocide in Lebanon the same way they were in Gaza. 1,974 dead as of the 6th, 127 children, 1.2 million displaced, which again, I guarantee will be pointed at as the problem the moment they need to do so. Okay, the IDF steps up on the 4th and says, over the last 4 days, the IDF has eliminated 2,000 military targets. How would they even go about verifying that, guys? And 250 Hezbollah terrorists. So what exactly would they call the military targets versus Hezbollah? I guess the buildings maybe they're talking about. The point is, as Kim Iverson points out, as they always do, just like they exposed themselves for in Gaza when it first started, counting every male over the age of 15 within your civilian deaths don't count. Even worse, in Gaza, and their own media called them out for this, they were caught pointing to every Palestinian killed as terrorists in their lists. Right in the beginning, they kept showing 200 terrorists killed today. And then it quickly came out that they were talking about everybody. Children, women, any Palestinian killed, that was their number. Which, by the way, I don't know why we have to pretend that's not the most obvious thing in the world. They're telling you that if you listen, if you watch their TikTok streams. But my point is, the Zionists and the willfully ignorant don't want to talk about it. Oh, that's weird. Hold on. UN refugee chief says airstrikes in Lebanon have violated international law. But of course, because the UN is Hezbollah now, I guess. Fake news. Right? I mean, they've already done it. They've already actually called. There's already people saying that Lebanon is not even a real state, that it never was. It didn't even exist. Well, I guess what else do you do but try to apply the same narrative that you think worked for you? It didn't really work for them. It's just that they've got the U.S. government blindly allowing their genocide, and the UK and others as well. So they're simply telling you 2 days ago, they're not maybe, they are violating the law with what they're doing. Guess what? It keeps going. Daniel McAdams points out the bombings that are taking place. DD Geopolitics, Israeli airstrikes. This was as of today, civilian casualties. Video scenes from Syria. My point is, this is constant. By the way, they've been bombing Syria periodically every week, long before October 7th, which every single time is a crime. The apartment block was reportedly the target. So what's the game now? Are we talking about Hamas now, or we just not pretend? We're just ignoring that you just bombed a civilian apartment building in Syria? Like, how do you even pretend like that's some kind of, like, if we're going to pretend over here that only because we're the most moral army and we're only going after human shields, but then you just periodically bomb a building full of people in Syria. No one talks about it. Iran was there, though, we're told. Even if they are, that's not a crime. On top of that, you're just bombing a whole building because Iran's in Syria? I mean, the point is, it's so flimsy. No one even in the past has even pushed back on these things. Now suddenly everyone is, and it looks like a cartoon. Ask yourself how this has been allowed for this long. Daniel says what we're all thinking. How has it become normalized that it's okay to take out whole blocks of residential high-rise housing because you think there might be one bad guy in the area? How in 2024 is this accepted in line with law of war? It's not, is the point. They're just doing it anyway. Ask yourself why it's continuing. Sana Saeed points out Netanyahu, backed by the Biden administration, is threatening another genocide. And guys, the link is right here for you. This is directly from The Guardian. It says Netanyahu warns the people in Lebanon. This as of today. You could face destruction like Gaza. And don't forget, we already showed you, as plenty of them have already said. Let's see if it pops up. Yep, right there. Multiple examples, actually. Here's the Jerusalem Post. Glant threatens Hezbollah. No, he threatens Lebanon and says, quote, we can do in Gaza, we can do in Beirut. That's all. It's exactly what it sounds like. We can do whatever we want in Lebanon, just like we're doing in Gaza. Well, there you go. Now he's warning them, get out of the way in their country, not Gaza, in a sovereign neighboring country. Move out of the way or you're going to die, is what he's saying. It's your fault if you stay behind as we indiscriminately bomb your home. He's warned Lebanese people that they could face destruction and suffering like the Palestinians in Gaza. That's what they wrote in this article. If they don't free the country from Hezbollah. So now you're demanding they take actions in their country or you're going to murder them all? How are anybody pretending this is not just blatant terrorism? Like, this is supposed to be their narrative and is terrorism. Imagine what they're actually thinking. I mean, guys, this is so terrifying that it's happening in real time and they're just letting it happen. This guy says, I literally gasp at this news. Netanyahu has delivered an ultimatum to Lebanon to free the country from Hezbollah, an extremely powerful paramilitary organization, which, by the way, has broad support from the people of Lebanon, or face, quote, destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. This isn't opening a new war front. It's a call for new genocidal operations. Like, my opinion, that's why I framed it this way today. Everything is the same. So if we're going to argue that the logic is not necessarily how many have been killed, which is actually the reality of one of the many deciding factors for genocide, even though they're going very quickly to reach those numbers in Lebanon, they're choosing to annihilate these people, and they're doing it the same way as Gaza. This is another genocide. It's simply the same genocide. That's what's really going on, and we all see it. Sad. Now, today, or rather late yesterday, Israel launches intense wave of airstrikes on 120 different sites in Lebanon. So I guess we're assuming every one of them are tunnels or targets or what? We're just ignoring that. You can read through this. You can look for yourself where some of these are civilian targets. They're murdering people in front of you. As Tiberius writes yesterday, Israel has killed more Lebanese civilians in the last 2 weeks than the total killed on October 7th. Yet the Western establishment puppets are still bleeding about October 7th while supplying the weapons for the ongoing massacres in Lebanon. Zero credibility. On top of that, realize that more in just 2 weeks than all that were killed on October 7th, knowing that most of them were killed by Israeli actions, whether by Hannibal directive, by indiscriminate bombing, any number of factors we've already proven to you that even the Israeli media have shown you. And the point is, it doesn't even matter. Yet they still just point back to October 7th. Why do you think that is? Mehdi Hassan points out what UNICEF says, and this really blows my mind. Not because they care, these are sociopaths, but the average people out there that may still be ignoring this. At least 100 children have been killed in Lebanon in 11 days. And over 690 children have been injured in the last 6 weeks. So think about this, guys, 100 children in 11 days. This is just getting started, just like with Gaza. How long until it's 10,000? Oh, but there's human shields and stuff. You're right. It's the same guard. At what point do we recognize this? Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know you guys get it. The point is so infuriating that just like we said with Gaza, we're watching this build. There's no narrative that makes this make sense. Oh, so that's why it's okay to kill 10,000 children. Understood. It doesn't make sense. That's why this is so jarring. UNICEF and partners are providing emergency medical supplies and essential services. As he says, no Western country would tolerate the killing of 100 kids in 11 days. And if this was Israel, not Lebanon, every Western country would be up in arms and it would dominate the news, as we all know. Now here, again, is what Matt had to say. Very short clip. But after all that we just saw, after the provable evidence, as even the U.S. government entities are saying, yes, they broke the law. Yes, we shouldn't be funding their genocide. And everything else we've seen, all the provable examples of what they're currently doing in Lebanon and Gaza, here's what this coward has to say.
That we have seen as of yet leads us to conclude that they are doing anything other than targeting a terrorist organization.
Oh, got it. Despite the high number of civilian deaths, doesn't matter. They claim they're targeting them and whoopsie, killed a bunch of kids, but they tried their best. Is that how the law works, Matt? Guys, these people deserve to be in prison. I mean, what they're doing right now should be enough in any court of law. This is complicity. You're covering up the genocide you're funding and arming. That's what his job is. But just like Blinken, he's a stooge. He is the mindless talker set out there to play the front man. So if something needs to be thrown under the bus, that's him right there. He may not think that. It's the truth. Now here is first, this actually, Asal Raj is pointing out, Remember when bombing hospitals was a big deal? It sure used to be, at least they claimed that. After destroying Gaza's healthcare system, now Israel's attacking hospitals and killing medics in Lebanon, where there's no hostages to, quote, rescue. How does that make sense? This is a war crime, funded by U.S. tax dollars, and U.S. officials couldn't care less. Lebanon hospitals close as Israeli airstrikes hit their facilities. What are we saying? Are there tunnels? Are we just pretending like we don't care? Everybody needs to be... If you have a care for human life, or the law, or sovereignty, or any number of things, it's time to speak up about this. Sarah Abdallah points out that Israel dropped bombs on healthcare centers in Jaya, Lebanon. 6 Lebanese hospitals are now out of service due to Israeli bombs. 6. This is just getting started. How is that even possible? This is from the 5th. This is terrorism, 100%. Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group. After destroying 90% of Gaza's mosques, Israeli warplanes have bombed a mosque in Yorin, southern Lebanon. Southern Lebanon. What is Israel's issue with places of worship? And you realize, look at this. It's the same thing we keep seeing. Targeted destruction of their infrastructure. Eye on Palestine, the Israeli occupation has bombed near Beirut International Airport in the capital of Lebanon. 4 videos showing you different examples of just bombing what are supposed to be protected areas. They don't care. This one, this just adds insult to injury because it's obvious and it's what they've done every time in the past. Israel is dropping depleted uranium bombs on residential buildings in Beirut. Read that again. Depleted uranium bombs on civilians. These highly toxic weapons cause birth defects and cancer rates in Iraq, Basra, and Fallujah worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And realize that we're talking about using these, which are illegal anywhere, on civilian targets, only increasing the criminality. And this is from a Cradle article. But here, actually, so this is the article coming from the UN. This is, what's the platform again? The U.S. Naval Institute. Closer look at Israel's use of 80 bunker bombs. So this guy's simply, oh wait, did I put this in the wrong spot? Oh, shoot. Well, I'll read it here either way. Again, it looks like I mixed a couple of these up. This one is simply about the point is they're using depleted uranium. Actually, here, let me do this. I'll finish with that. So here is what I think is important. So this is from Beirut.com. Citing, now again, take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, people could be lying, but I'll show you why I think it's a very valid claim. The Syndicate of Chemists in Lebanon, which just because it's from Lebanon does not therefore mean terrorists and we shouldn't trust, like the idiots and politicians in the White House or in Congress want you to think. They're far more terrorist in every possible way than everything we're talking about today because of what they've done around the world and continue to advocate for. Whether Israel or U.S. politicians, it's obvious. But nonetheless, because it's in Lebanon, they have an interest in giving a certain area to consider it. But my point is, they're showing you that they tested the blast sites and are finding depleted uranium, which my point is clearly this is a public claim and the information is going to be tested. Mark my words. And the point is they're telling you that they're using depleted uranium. Now here is the actual, oh wait, hold on. Oh, you know what I did? I have it written down, not on a screen you can see. Hold on. It's, let's see. It's not, she's technically not important. I just wanted you to see the claim and we'll go to it next. You could break this down. Orwell sent me the translation. So basically they're just telling you exactly what I'm saying. They're telling you that they tested this and they're using depleted uranium. And here, the Cradle covered this and did their investigation, which they conclude the same thing. My point is there should be no question about this. Obviously, other than the general question about whether they may just say that to benefit their current narrative. But again, my point is that historically speaking, and this is not Hezbollah, it's Lebanon, and they're telling you that they found this and the evidence will be presented, most likely in some kind of a setting. Like, remember the last time when Iran, what was it again? It was, I forget his name. I like him. He's a guy from one of these Iranian foreign ministers that was very savvy and intelligent. Anyway, his point, he tried to go to the UN to present evidence about the lies they were presenting around Iran. You know what they did? They refused to let him in. It just shows you how dishonest they are. Like they say fake claims they can't prove, no one believes them, and they comes to show they're lying and they won't even let them in. So my point on top of it is that the evidence will be presented. On top of that, the U.S. has already sent them to Ukraine. This is recent. This is from the Ukraine ongoing war. This is at a point when we all already know and deem them illegal. They do it anyway. This was according to their own reports. On top of that, Going back to Iraq, we know they've used them. The U.S. fired depleted uranium at civilians. You see the point? It's not just firing them. They targeted civilians according to their own reports. Here's a study, going back to this, the same conversation, weaponized uranium and adverse health outcomes in Iraq, showing you that they're even showing how long this happens. And this is where you get into how this was worse than the bombings of Japan in the context of the long-term effects. Here is a report with Democracy Now! Showing you that 10 years later, U.S. has left Iraq with mass displacement, as always, and an epidemic of birth defects because of what they use. This is my point, guys. These things are constant and always used after the fact. In many cases, to make it look like their country can't take care of themselves, like they're unhealthy, or here to use their mass displacement to benefit your other agendas. Every single time. 2019, new study documents depleted uranium impacts on children in Iraq. Here we are, doing it again. If you don't think the U.S. government is aware or involved, which, I mean, this is my opinion, but if you don't think that it's possible, then you're not paying attention. Now, here's what Blinken had to say after all of this. After all that's going on the 4th, he says the U.S. is at the forefront of humanitarian response to the growing crisis in Lebanon. The growing crisis? What is it, a flood? Funny how you can do more right now about this than care about people in North Carolina, right? I didn't see you make a big statement about how the growing crisis in North Carolina, right? But the growing crisis, and by that, by growing crisis, do you mean Israeli carpet bombings of civilians that you're actively obfuscating? Like 6 full buildings in regard to bombing? Like, it's incredible. Like, this is my point about, like, I feel like he's being put to this stuff. As an individual, you must realize how stupid that is. Like, we all see what's going on, and you don't even reference Israel, the growing crisis in Lebanon, like it's their fault. He's announcing, as we already pointed out, and many already have around what's going on in North Carolina, $157 million in assistance. But of course, my point is, many of the ones griping about that would never point out or would be okay with them funding Israel while not caring about North Carolina, like Lindsey Graham, for example, or many of the Republican leadership, or many of the leading Republican mainstream alternative media. I care about all of it. It's consistent logic. If we're going to say that we shouldn't be sending any money overseas while Americans are suffering, we have to agree with that in every dynamic, which I would agree with. Now, obviously, if we're going to pick if we're going to go beyond that and pick something that needs to be funded, well, obviously, I would argue the places that are suffering because of our foreign policy or the government's foreign policy. But I think the line is clear. If we're in a position where we're pretending we don't have money for North Carolina, then we shouldn't be sending money anywhere overseas, anywhere, even if we feel a moral obligation to do so. No. I think it's important. But another way he goes on to say, we are committed to supporting those in need. Like, you know, the ones being killed by your bombs, or delivering essential aid that Israel can block and lie about, that you know about and you'll hide from us. You get where this is going. It's just it's incredible. Secretary Blinken is a war criminal, without question. And I added to that, as he knowingly obfuscates this Israeli campaign of death, remember this is exactly what it looks like to manufacture a refugee crisis and wealth transfer. Don't forget that fact when the U.S. government in the near future is blaming them for what it was a central part in creating. And then this one, again, lastly, since this was wrong, more so just about the bombing I should have had in the last segment, Israel apparently used more bunker busters, to kill Nasrallah, which, by the way, killed hundreds of people in multiple buildings. They used more bunker busters to do that than the U.S. used in the entirety of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. According to the government. This is from the U.S. Naval, what was it called again? U.S. Naval Institute. I mean, how do we even pretend? Like, so here they are talking about precision strikes, most moral army, more strategic than any weapon, any military in history. And we're to believe that makes sense? So and now on top of that, the argument they made about the pagers. Oh, so we're being told that you can pinpoint target a single pager on one person, but yet then you're carpet bombing entire buildings, right? What was that about precise again? You know, it's just incredible. Even though we know that pager discussion was actually far more indiscriminate, it's about using their narratives against them. They're arguing from within their narrative from the COVID conversation. The point here is they're highlighting the fact that they did. And they used more than the entirety of the invasion of Iraq. So that's money that your tax dollars are going towards what they're using. It's indiscriminately killing people. Like, they could have used one of those, mind you. But the reason I would argue they didn't is, like I said, they didn't know for sure, which is why they didn't even point to it until after the fact, is because they just broad stroke killed just everywhere in the area while got under a guise of diplomacy and while in New York with the UN pretending like you want peace, and ordered it, murdered them all, more than the entirety of the invasion of Iraq, but we're going to pretend like they was a pinpoint target for civilian. I mean, it's disgusting. And this is where we come to the point about, that same old clip we see. Are we the baddies? So my point is, listen, guys, maybe especially those that are new, you are not the government. It's one of the most classic manipulations. They're supposed to work for you. The government is not the people. Now, they're from the people, but once they become the government, they are simply they are an entity that is supposed to work for the people. To conflate the idea of the government as a body with the people is an illusion. Individually, yes, they would be part of the people, but the government as an entity is not. But today, they love to conflate that to make it seem like they are just like you, or you're like they have the same rights that you do. It's not the case. I say, even if you're still tricked into thinking your vote matters, it should, by the way, but they've stolen it from us. Nonetheless, many of us need to ask ourselves, so come to Jesus meeting, guys, if our government represents everything we pretend to fight, can we ask ourselves that? Do they represent everything that they want to pretend they're fighting right now? If you're honest with yourself, the answer is very clear. And here's an example of David Camp from antiwar.com. He says, I forgot that the U.S. Embassy, I guess is what we're calling this, in Lebanon is basically a fortress. Look at this. It's like Game of Thrones. That's supposed to be the embassy? How do people get to it? It's a walled-off fortress. Guys, that's an occupation. Like, that's where this is going. That's the design. That's what Israel's going to do, and the U.S. is going to blindly support. So here, on the final parts of Lebanon discussion, Sarah Abdallah points, we already showed you this recently, but the point is that this is the road leading to Lebanon's international civilian airport. Not only is a rubble in the street, it's broken and blocked off. Okay, so they're stopping that. Now, we already showed you this reality. Israel spoke up at the beginning and said, we're not letting flights out because, weapons. Okay. The problem was that the U.S. Embassy spoke up and said, I think I've got that actually. Right here. They spoke up and said the U.S. Embassy is not evacuating U.S. citizens. You'd think they've learned their lesson from this, from like Libya. So, nope, because I don't think there was a lesson to be learned there. I think these are deliberate actions, mind you. They don't care about you. Or whether or not you're in the government, mind you. But the point, a U.S. embassy is not evacuating U.S. citizens. That's while they know Israel is shutting down the airports because weapons. So the worst part is there's a commercially available flight. So we're not going to pay for you to leave, even though we know you're at threat because Israel's carpet bombing. But you could pay for it, right? Except they already know Israel wasn't letting it go. That's in addition to the fact that the civilian itself was being shut down. They weren't letting flights out. So your government, knowing you were there, knowing they were carpet bombing, wouldn't help you leave and then said, yeah, go ahead and fly out when they knew that you couldn't. And that's why it's important to point out that an American citizen was killed in Lebanon because of these indiscriminate strikes. And even worse, as Sarah Rawl points out, genuinely surprised that there's no visible media at Kamal Jawad's funeral. He's a U.S. citizen whose 4 children grew up in Dearborn, Michigan. They're grads of the University of Michigan and Stanford. He was killed in an Israeli airstrike this week. His family is in Lebanon, visiting family in Lebanon. That's him right there. I guess it doesn't matter because you can kind of casually pretend like maybe he's a terrorist because they killed. The point is, whoever out there screaming about America, make America great again, America first, and you're blindly supporting the ignorance of your American first politicians who don't speak up about Americans being killed by a foreign government, then you don't care about America first. At least admit that you're pretending, or however you want to look at it. We cannot pretend that this makes sense. They're murdering Americans, whether accidentally or not, and not a word from an American politician. If it was an Israeli American in Gaza, oh my God, we hear about it for 3 weeks. Do you notice the difference? You damn well should. It should drive you crazy if you actually care about America first. Here is an Israeli ambassador. This speaks for itself. Even Sky News is pushing back and saying, well, you are killing people. But the way they respond, this is right now. Even with Lebanon, with everything else we're seeing, with the death toll we've seen, they're still sticking to their guns because what else are they going to do?
You've also eliminated people. 28 health workers died in Israeli raids one day this week. Children have died. The pager and walkie-talkie attacks, of course, they were targeted at Hezbollah fighters, but...
Oh, of course. Why would you say that? See, that's the point. You're giving intent. You don't know what their intent was. All we know is it happened. But he's giving that bone because that's what corporate media does. But even what he just said so far, how can you imagine from there going, but we don't want to target civilians? So 28 healthcare workers in 24 hours. But no, it wasn't our fault. You guys, these are children. Children who have earned too much power that don't deserve it.
You didn't know who was going to be in the room, and some people who were clearly not fighters died.
Yeah, so you miss it. So they didn't know who was going to be in the room with those pagers. 5 months they were there. There's no denying that. She didn't even push back. But yet, I don't want to kill civilians, though, even though you clearly did.
The point here is the collateral, nobody is arguing about Israel's right to defend itself.
Yeah, no, we are, though, because they don't have a legal right to defend themselves as an occupying force. Funny how the law and the basic provable reality is a missed point by the journalists of today.
But the collateral damage that Israel is building up is, some people would argue, building up actually even more hostility, creating more enemies, preparing a new generation of fighters against Israel.
Which is what they want, because that's how they preserve the Zionist mentality and the Zionist illusion of necessity.
Is this really the way?
So we have zero interest in killing civilians. Zero.
Think about just saying that. You just murdered 28 doctors in 24 hours. You don't even have a narrative for why. But we don't want to, though. Oh, gotcha. Okay, end of interview.
Interest, neither in Gaza or in Lebanon. We
But
have nothing.
But you're doing it.
No, we're not doing it. What we're actually
Well, they're dying.
No, we're actually it's Hamas and Hezbollah who are in charge, and let me explain why. Because they're using their own people as human shields, and you know that.
Wow.
You know that they're a terror organization that couldn't care less about their human life in Gaza.
It just every day by day, it just begins to get more cartoonish. And you know that, and you know you're supposed to say that too. No, we don't know that. The evidence is not there. It has not been there. Robert's covered this many times, going back to old UN investigations. I would be the last person to argue that they would never do that. But the evidence is not there, and the evidence is there in a landslide from human shields from Israel. And again, this is what we're talking about. These people need to be the ones going, no, I'm done. I'm done pretending this makes sense. You're lying, and we know it. That's where we all need to be.
This is Sinwar, with his cynical plan, created infrastructure in Gaza that turned every hospital, every nursery and kindergarten into a place that...
You realize that's provably false. We can go right now, as people have already done, and show that every house you look in does not have a tunnel. And I don't mean like... I mean, it's everyone... The point is, I don't see any. Zero. And there is evidence to look at. So even there, right there, even if there are some that we haven't seen, she's lying. And everybody knows that. There's not a tunnel under every home and every school. That's the way they justify murdering everybody. But on top of that, over and over and over, at least 4 times that I've seen, they've been caught lying about these things. Shifa was embarrassing for them. But they got caught pretending tunnels were where they weren't. Pretending they show, here, we walk into the tunnel and then edit, and all of a sudden there's a different color or wires where they weren't before. Like, these are bad propagandists. But it doesn't matter, because historically they could just shout down a viewer like this and they would follow suit.
It is a storage for rockets.
And my point
can
is
you imagine this type
you...
of cool and cynical plan of anyone doing that besides a terror organization?
And my point is, you know that, that's your point, that's your viewpoint.
I love how he says your viewpoint. See, that's different. Usually it would just be meek allowance of the shouted narrative. But he even kind of said your viewpoint, which suggested that might not be the case.
But you are still, as a country, and not you personally, but obviously Israel, is still pursuing an aggressive military strategy, which does create this level of collateral damage.
That's the point. That's what we said in the very beginning, and any UN expert or human rights lawyer who is let's just put the vast majority, save for the Zionist fake human rights lawyers like Arsen Atrovsky, are very clearly telling you this is collective punishment. There's no narrative that makes this make sense. You don't bomb an entire building full of 400 people to kill one commander, which is the argument they made with Wolf Blitzer. acting like that made sense. It just doesn't, guys. There is no legal justification. I don't care if he had all of them tied to his arms. It's still a crime. And that's going to come out at some point, but they're just shoving this forward. And again, why we pretend like these media talking heads even know what they're talking about? Some of them do. That's my point. It's just because they don't know how to push back does not mean that what they're saying is the full picture.
Now, how much are you prepared to contemplate in pursuit of your war aims?
I don't agree with the accusation. I think that
Well, it's just a fact.
to begin, no, it's
people,
not a.
People die because of Israeli
Wait a second.
missiles.
People die because your attacks in Afghanistan
It's not
and
just
Iraq.
Hezbollah.
And you see how this goes. You did it in Iraq. Now, what about I can do it too? See my point? And that's always what they do. That's the last-ditch effort. Nobody cared that you murdered civilians in Iraq. So, essentially, you're saying you are murdering civilians, but it's okay because you did it too? Oops.
Second, people died because your attack in Afghanistan and in Iraq. There is no Western military, no matter how much cautious it wants to be, that can operate better than the way IDF is operating.
100%. Easily. I mean, guys, you realize that there are metrics already showing that they've used, more bombs in Gaza in a short period of time than all the wars of World War II combined? Or whatever the metric was. We keep doing this. They keep showing you the combination of children killed in just this one time frame is more than all the children killed in multiple years of the past. There's no way you make sense of that with what you just said. And that's not defending Western warfare. Western warfare is just as criminal. I'm specifically thinking of the U.S. government at this moment, but plenty of other examples. So you can't compare these because provably you have gone, what's the right term there? Quite a bit further. With every single thing you're doing, with every action you're taking, more and more, you're breaking every record we've ever seen of the wrong direction for war. Every one of them. But our argument is simply that you killed them just as many as we did. I don't know why you think that's a fair argument.
Operating in a very populated area. What we do, and it's important to say, we warn the population.
Nope, they lie. Countless times they don't.
We made designated areas in Gaza.
That you then bombed as well, and everybody, including your own media, has proven this.
We called the population in Lebanon to flee, and they're actually listening.
Nope, most of them didn't. And most of them ended up fleeing the 1.2 million people that are out struggling because you just bombed their homes and bombed civilian areas. And the ones that are fleeing for their lives because you're bombing indiscriminately. Guys, this is being proven. It's being filmed. But again, what else are they going to do? They got to trot out their liars to try to convince the one person that might listen to them.
To our calling. And they're fleeing to a better place to be.
A better place? That's a weird way to say that.
Safe. And we are minimizing casualties. So you need to.
Minimizing casualties? 28 doctors in one day? I mean, it's really insulting to your intelligence. To anyone this is my point. Anybody with a brain and objectivity is just going, well, that's not true. We know that's not true. So only people that are going along with these people are terrible people or willfully ignorant.
To understand, the main problem is the fact those terror organizations are using them as human shields, and by doing that, committing a double war crime.
Oh, a double war crime. Interesting. I'm telling you, see, they're uneducated. It's just so funny. They're just lazy and propaganda. It's not my opinion. You can look at what they're doing. They're saying things that don't even make sense. They're clumsily patching together narratives. They've gotten away with this for so long. And I'm only talking about Zionists, whether Christian or Jewish. There's plenty of Israelis that I see right now calling this out. Now, then so she's over here saying human shields, right? In Lebanon is what she's talking about. That's the only reason. And yet again, as always, they shoot themselves in the foot 14 times over because they lie about whatever they can to achieve a narrative when it suits them. So 4 days before this started in Lebanon, at least this current wave of their aggression, well, here's the U.S. entity or Israeli entity telling you that they weren't doing that. And then suddenly, when it suits their interest, Daniel Hagari says they've been doing it for 20 years. One of them are lying. You can pick.
Take a look at how many civilians were killed in Lebanon as a result, as an unfortunate byproduct of Israeli strikes. And if you compare that to the situation in Gaza, I think that what you will find is it's the same IDF, the same operating procedures that we have in Gaza, only that here in Lebanon, until now, the situation is that Hezbollah has so far distinguished itself from civilian population, and they haven't been fighting from within cities. And as such, when the IDF has deployed lethal weapons against them, then terrorists have been killed and not civilians.
So the point is that because it suits him in that moment to compare Lebanon to Gaza, because that's just, they'll take whatever they can to lie to you. He's saying, see, in Gaza, the civilian death count is higher because they're doing human shields, even though it's because they've been murdering them for a year. But over here, it's less because they're not, is his point. 4 days later, suddenly it's the opposite. Why? Because now they're indiscriminately bombing in Lebanon. So again, I mean, I think it's very obvious that the lie is the narrative of human shields to justify murder. My point is, though, if you choose, you just have to acknowledge that they're lying to you when it suits their interests.
For over 20 years, Hezbollah has deployed its arms inside homes and militarized civilian infrastructure.
There is a list.
As a result, the Hezbollah terrorist organization has turned southern Lebanon into a battlefield.
This guy just looks like a clown. He's just a comically looking person. I have no respect for any of them. And it's so embarrassing and it's infuriating that we have to sit here and watch these people who you damn well know what they're doing. He knows what he's doing. And yet day in and day out, they stand there and lie to you while they murder and rape. Now, Warfare Analysis points out something I think is important to reference. Now, here's the actual website, by the way, so you can check it for yourself and know that this is not, mistranslated or whatever else. This is a guy reading to his son. Now, what do we keep hearing about? All the indoctrination, about how they Hamas and tell them they're terrorists and all the stuff they want to tell you. This is what he's saying to his child, reading a book. It says, "This is Lebanon. It is beautiful. I love to go to Lebanon and stroll there," said Alan. "It is dangerous. You cannot go there. It is not ours yet." Alan thought and said, "Lebanon is ours." That's what he's reading for his child. It's a children's book titled Alon in Lebanon, published by this website. It's Yurtsafon, Settlements in Lebanon Organization. The book is authored by Amos Azara, a lecturer at Arrow University. So the point is, just like we keep telling you, there's already plans to occupy Lebanon. It's been there for a long time. They've coveted southern Lebanon forever. This is called My Skin is North, the movement for settlement in southern Lebanon. The guy's reading a book to his child about how we own Lebanon, and it's not safe yet, but we'll make it that way. I mean, this is the real problem, the projection of what they really are building. It's pretty sad. It's pretty scary because it's happening in real time, and a lot of powerful people are trying to tell you that they all deserve to die in Lebanon. So, to finish in regard to Gaza, we just went past October 7th, the anniversary of that day. I just want to reiterate the same old point that don't forget that Israel funded Hamas right up until October 7th. And for all we know, continues to. But the point is the same. The reality of what they've told you on the record, where Ehud Barak, former prime minister, and this person is the former head of Shin Bet, telling you on the record, we gave them billions of dollars in cash. Now, again, for those that want to pretend it's about humanitarian aid, remind me again where they get aid from. Oh, that's right. It's shipped in on trucks because there is none there. So let's pretend you can give them cash to buy aid from the aid store. No, you must bring it in, and Israel controls that. So when they give them cash, what do you think it's for? And realize that their own people have admitted this. And that's why we include the actual article from Haaretz that quotes Netanyahu in 2019 saying anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support Hamas, transferring money to Hamas. That is our strategy. And he goes on, if you read the full document, about how they need to do this to make sure the two-state solution never happens, to make sure they keep them divided, and realize while this was being stated or being done, post-October 1967, they were screaming that we want this. We want a two-state solution while provably acting against that. That's not for us. That's a fact. So maybe we should ask what else they're lying about, don't you think? And here is a Haaretz article from 2020. Looks like Twitter doesn't want to load it. There it goes. Mossad chief visited Doha, urged Qatar to continue Hamas financial aid. It's all right in the surface. You guys know all this. So my point, though, is that if you're going to start creating an outraged narrative of October 7th anniversary about Hamas, you damn well better include the fact that Israel was funding them when that happened. But guess what? Not a single U.S. politician who spent all day screaming about the worst attack on Jews, except there was a lot more than that, and most of it was done by Israel, when you're ignoring that fact. Now, Matt Kennard points out this was a status quo before October 7th, if anyone cares to pay attention. He says, and you're surprised people will resist? WikiLeaks. This is from 2011. Israel aimed to keep Gaza economy on the brink of collapse. Now, that's an economic point. The same point applies to food. A long time ago, they said minimal caloric, and they maintained insecurity. And now we know why. Because then they can pull the rug out and act like they're still giving them some food and say they're starved, it's not our fault, knowing that that rug pulling would guarantee starvation while maintaining the illusion of giving them some food. It's the same reason the U.S. government occupies countries and forces them to only produce what the U.S. needs for their interest or others they're working with, and demanding that they import from the U.S. So the moment they stop doing what they're told, they pull that rug out and they can't sustain themselves. Then they turn around and say, see, they can't even help themselves. It's really dark if you realize how deep this goes. Now, Saul Rod points out from Al Jazeera, they put out a recent documentary, but this is a different, there's the 120-minute one. This is a 58 minutes simply going over, and this is actually mind-blowing. 58 minutes is how long this is. Can you see what it is? Right now, we're only at 0 years old, under 1-year-olds. Remember, the 1-year-olds was 56 pages. It's names of people killed in civilians in Gaza. More than 41,800 people have been killed. Guess what this says? She says that a video listing names of Palestinians killed in Gaza is 59 minutes long. It takes over a minute to get through just 0 years old. Visualizingpalestine.org puts this out, and it says 6 wars old. If you really want to reach some average people out there, look to your child sitting next to you. Maybe they're 6 years old. Now imagine, because they're 6 years old, they have lived through 6 different genocidal wars against their family. Or rather, I guess, 16 years old, excuse me, but they've lived through 6 wars because they're lived for 16 years. Born around, you can read through it for yourself. I want to pretty much wrap since we're pretty long, but the point is that, what do you think this does to them, guys? And every one of those are illegitimate. Every single one of these we should now know is being organized and engineered and driven into reality for the execution of Palestinians by and large. Pelham points out this Palestinian elder, Haj Zaid Abu Halil, who a while ago, this is not new, this video, he attempted to stop IDF soldiers from firing on youth. As you can clearly see, literally putting his own body in the way of them firing, trying to stop them. And they're going, get out of the way, and trying to fire around him. Like, that's how ridiculous this is. Now, of course, in this good point to make sure you double check all this stuff, it says later in the afternoon. It's not the same day. This was an older story. The point was, now today, in the genocide ongoing, they broke into this guy's house and beat him to death. Ask yourself why. Taking advantage of somebody, he's a known protester against what they do. They're just recognizing people like this. I mean, they just break into his house and beat him to death. Is there going to be some kind of a court trial? No, of course not. Not even in normal, whatever you would call normal times, especially not right now. This is what they live under. Here is a former member of the IDF telling you his perspective on this.
Those who try very hard.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the former Minister of Finance, excuse me. So from within the Israeli government.
Those who try very hard to extract from people like me, from DiEM25, a condemnation of the attack by the Hamas guerrillas, will never get it. And they will never get it for a very simple reason. Those who care about humans without any discrimination, those who care equally about a Jew and an Arab, must ask themselves a very simple question. What exactly is their idea of the cessation of hostilities. That Palestinians are going to lay down their arms and go back into the largest open-air prison in the world, where they are constantly suffocated by the apartheid state. In other words, back in South Africa, in the era of apartheid, what was the problem? Was it that some members of the black resistance, including the ANC, but not only the ANC, took up arms against the South African regime and sometimes killed innocent people? Was that the problem with apartheid? No, the problem was apartheid.
Now, important to point out, though, I would argue, and this is where we have to draw a fine line. Now, you can have some acceptance in your mind or allowance for the idea that this is that, what they're saying, in war, people die, or however you want to play that in your mind. I argue today, even with that we have to draw the fine line. Like I said, with Hamas, kidnapped children, killed people. There are crimes that were committed, and they have to be held accountable for that. Same point here, though, is under apartheid, which now we look back on and go, clearly that was the apartheid of South Africa. That was the problem, is what he's saying. But there were incidents where people from the oppressed side would respond and innocent people would be killed. Now, obviously, the real problem was the apartheid, and they're acting in resistance, which is a legal right. But there's nonetheless a line there where there should still be accountability. But when you can stand back and take it in the larger context of what's really going on, maybe lesser than the larger picture, but I still think we need to draw that line. But, and then allow, the point is people who are enforcement side of it can decide that, well, this is why it happened and it wasn't their fault, whatever. But the point is it's still considered a crime. They still killed innocent people. Now, I guarantee some will disagree with that because they think that it's more important to side with the resistance and the context. And I understand where you're coming from. I mean, largely I agree. But I think the way it is today, this is like saying irritatingly objective. We have to stand on the line. We have to be better than the other side. It's like we keep talking about, where they rationalize doing the same thing in reverse because they started it. We need to be better than that.
Apartheid, whether it's practiced in South Africa or in Palestine or Israel, is always going to procure violence because it's a violent, misanthropic system. Any human being living under apartheid at some point will either die a terrible, silent death or rebel and often take innocent people.
It's important just to understand the difficult context and then realize the only reason they're in that position to have to make that choice is because of the apartheid state. And that's really what he's talking about. Rami Abdul from Euromed Human Rights Group says the Israeli occupation bombs children as they sleep in their homes. October 5th. This is ongoing, guys. This is Gaza. This is that while people are now focusing more on Lebanon, we can't lose sight of what's going on. Realize that the only reason Hezbollah is pushing back on this is because they're fighting for Gaza. So let's not lose sight of what this is really about. Now, this is a quick clip from an insider who left BBC. And I'll let her explain why. It has to do with this phrase you've heard a lot. Israel has a right to defend itself. We just heard that, right? Sky News and whatever else. Well, maybe this will change your opinion, hopefully, on the reality of what they're actually saying.
Israel has a right to defend itself. That was the editorial line that was drilled into us, into all of our coverage. It was really an integral part of the editorial stance. To a guest talking about, Israeli airstrikes killing Palestinians in Gaza, that would be the response from our presenters.
Denying access to food is collective punishment, and that we should all be clear in saying that.
Israel will argue, obviously, that it has a right to defend itself.
People were terrified of using the word genocide in coverage. They still are. You will very rarely see it in any BBC coverage. And if an interviewee says the word genocide,
this is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
That word is, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
the presenter will almost always panic.
The Labour Party, of all political parties, which has always had a strong peace contingent within it, is now actually supporting genocide.
Okay, if we can maybe just avoid that language, if that's okay.
How wild is that? And that first example of defend yourself, the guy's literally talking about withholding aid shipments. Well, they have a right to defend themselves. That was a clumsy use. That's why they used it. That's one of the worst examples I've seen. And now we, even on top of that, have a verifiable evidence from our own government telling you they know they did that. But defend yourselves. I mean, guys, this whole thing is exposed so much more than I think they ever thought was possible. Now, again, here's Wilkerson I played yesterday at the end to show you, or somebody in with some political standing acknowledging the facts.
Palestinians had every right to do on October the 7th. Israel has been under the UN Charter as an occupying power and under Geneva since 1967. It has never fulfilled its responsibilities as an occupying power.
And that's why UNRWA exists, which is why they're trying to remove it, despite all the lies they're producing. It's about the right of return. That's what he's talking about.
Never intended to fulfill them. In fact, it has dispossessed the Palestinians of their lands, of their orchards, destroyed their homes, killed their children. It is an irresponsible, under the law, occupying power. Therefore, the Palestinians had every right to do what they did on October the 7th. Every time that F-16 flies over Gaza and drops that 250-pound bomb and kills that child, you are guilty, America.
Now realize that the point overall is not that the crimes were committed were okay, which is how they'll try to frame that. It's that regardless of those crimes that were committed, they still have a legal right to armed resistance, which is which is how it started, which is that's always protected under international law. That's just a simple fact. And that's why it's become so uncomfortable for so many of them. Now, to finish in general, I just want to include the information. I mean, it's ongoing as we speak. Unitarali highlights that the Giora Island plan has started. An Israeli member of Knesset from Netanyahu's party has announced, as you can look for yourself, and this was last night, so this was on the 5th, that the IDF launched an operation in northern Gaza with the objective of completely eliminating all Palestinians from the area. Here's a 972 article saying a plan to liquidate northern Gaza is gaining steam. This is back in September. So this is planned. We all know this because it's been partition plan, the settlements. I mean, all of it is on the surface if you actually look. Now, the Cradle put out this today. Israel has now issued a new evacuation order for Jabalia, Bet Hanun, Bet Lahia, and other areas, nearly the entire northern section of Gaza. So obviously it's happening, saying that the military will act forcefully, ordering residents to move south. Now, they apparently claim to have given them 24 hours to get out of the way. I mean, what are we talking about? You realize there's an entire divider from north to south. They have nowhere to go. And even if they go to the south, they're still bombing everywhere. We just showed you Khan Yunis this is why it's so torturous. That not only do they know that, they know we know that. They know the U.S. government knows that. And so they just laughingly tell them to run around and then just bomb everywhere they like. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's essentially what's happening. Even Khan 11 News confirms the general's plan, as it's called, is underway. The entire northern area of the Gaza Strip will be cleansed according to the general's plan. That's what he says. Finally, this is as of today. Gaza tonight, the general's plan, stage 2. And an extremely dangerous step as part of the genocidal Giora Island plan, Israeli military orders all three hospitals operating in northern Gaza to shut down and evacuate in 24 hours. What about the people in beds? What about people starving? What about the ones that are so emaciated or missing legs and arms that they can't move? What about the elderly? What about the babies? Doesn't matter, guys. They don't care. Just like they left them to rot in Gaza in the hospital. I think it was Shifa. I forget. There's nothing about this is legal like everything else. So get ready for another massacre, unless somebody does something. But I think we already can tell that the U.S. government, left or right, doesn't care. So it's on you to care. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I know it can be hard to talk about this stuff. It's hard in general to know that this exists. But the only way we're ever going to change this is if we do something, if we choose to care about it. If we stand up and say, I'm done pretending what you're saying is true, I'm done with your BS. I'm not going to allow you to just lie straight to my face, no matter what the context. I'm going to stand up for what I know is right. I'm going to accept the consequences of doing so because I know it to be right. I'm done. Help me fight back because I'm tired of seeing these people suffer. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.